Good morning. Welcome to the California Coastal Commission for April 16th. Glad to see you all here. And we begin our morning with a roll call, and then we'll go over agenda changes before we have about 30 minutes of public comment available. If you're interested in speaking and you haven't filled out a speaker card, please do so. With that, I will ask Vanessa to call the roll.
Commissioner Beelan. Here. Commissioner Diaz. Here. Commissioner Groom.
Present.
Commissioner Jones. Here. Commissioner McClure. Here. Commissioner Mitchell. Here. Commissioner Schallenberger. Here. Commissioner Turnbull Sanders.
Here.
Commissioner Urenga.
Here.
Commissioner Bowman.
Here.
Chair Kinsey.
Present here. We have a quorum. Very good. All right, turn to Dan Carl to review with us any agenda changes we have for today.
Thank you, Chair Kinsey, and good morning. So I passed out the sheet for agenda changes. These are all on agenda page 9. And we'll start with item number 13B on page 9. That's the Frank matter in Santa Cruz County. That item has been postponed. Staying on page 9, item number 13C, this is the King Ventures item in Sand City. That one too has been postponed. And then item number 13D, also on page 9, this is the Grinds residential project in the Asilomar Dunes is moved to consent. That completes the changes. For the audience, as Chair Kinsey noted, if you do want to address the commission today, there are speaker slips available at the staff table out front. And also, if you could put your cell phones into quiet mode or turn them off so as not to disrupt the proceedings, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that brings us to our public comment period, and I have only one speaker card for that, and that's Aaron Wilder. If you come up to the microphone, and I'd ask, in any public comments that we make today, if you would begin by stating your name, it would be very helpful for us, and we appreciate it. Good morning.
Thank you. My name is Aaron Wilder, and I started a little farm in Point Reyes 6 years ago called Tabletop Farm. I have 5 different plots totaling about 12.5 acres. And I farm on about 7 acres of those 12.5 acres. I am here because I'm concerned that policy language in the LCP might...
Mr. Chair. Aaron, I appreciate it. We're going to have an extended public hearing on that. So that will be your opportunity to speak specifically about Marin County situation.
Okay, I'll wait for that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Okay. In fact, there's no more. So you're going to get that conversation going very quickly. We have no more public comment, and so we move into our local coastal programs. Our Deputy Director's report, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair Kinsey.
For the North Central Coast.
Yes. So the North Central DD's report today was distributed earlier. There's addendum in there and ex parte and correspondence received on today's items. We're also reporting 1 waiver and 1 extension. I'm not aware of any controversy or objections to those items, and we're looking for the Commission's concurrence on them.
Thank you. Any questions on the matter? Any unwillingness for unanimous concurrence? We concur.
Thank you, Chair Kinsey. Then that will bring us to the local coastal program agenda item and the Marin County implementation plan update. I would like to ask Kevin Kahn, the district supervisor in the Central Coast, who's doing double duty here in the North Central Coast, to give the staff presentation.
Thank you. Good morning.
Great. Good morning, Chair Kinsey and Commissioners. Agenda item 7A is the Marin County Implementation Plan update. The proposed amendment before you today is the culmination of a process that began nearly 7 years ago. The amendment request would replace the existing certified implementation plan in its entirety with new provisions designed to implement corresponding policies of the updated land use plan. The updated LUP was approved by the Commission, subject to suggested modifications in May of last year. Although the county has not yet accepted these suggested modifications, and the conditionally certified LUP is not yet effective, the Commission's regulations authorize the review of this proposed IP update. The standard of review for this IP update is the LUP that was conditionally certified by the Commission last year. Slide 2, please. First, I'd like to briefly note the process by which this IP amendment came before you today. Marin County's LCP was originally certified by the Commission in 1982. In 2008, the county embarked on a comprehensive planning process that sought to update the then 26-year-old document. After undertaking an extensive public process, including proactive outreach and dialogue with Commission staff on key update issues, the county approved an updated LUP and IP and submitted both documents to the Commission together as part of one LCP amendment submittal package. Subsequent to that submittal, both county and Commission staff agreed to separate the LUP and IP into separate amendments. And after extensive public comment and deliberation, the LUP portion was approved by the Commission last May, subject to numerous modifications addressing a broad array of coastal resource concerns. Slide 3, please. After the LUP was approved, it was necessary to engage in dialogue with both the county and members of the public about those modifications, including their intent and function, and how best to address any outstanding LUP issues in the IP update. In the 11 months since the LUP approval, Commission staff underwent an extensive public outreach process, including providing the county and the public with a public review IP draft in October, presenting draft language at local community forums, soliciting comments from and meeting with numerous stakeholder groups to understand their concerns about draft language, and directly responding to county comments. Even after publishing of the staff report, staff has continued to receive and respond to public comments, as evidenced by the addendum that has been distributed that makes additional changes and clarifications to both the staff report and the IP document itself. The result of this outreach is the IP amendment document before you today, which attempts to address complicated land use planning and permitting issues raised by a broad swath of Marin County constituents, including agricultural interests, environmental groups, property owners, and Marin County Community Development Agency staff, in a manner that is consistent with and is adequate to carry out the land use plan as that document was conditionally certified by the Commission last year. Before going into detail on the IP document, I'd like to take a quick moment to describe Marin County's coastal zone. Slide 4, please. The county contains approximately 106 miles of coastline and contains a coastal zone that totals roughly 130 square miles or 82,000 acres. Of this total, approximately 53 square miles are owned and managed by the federal government, contained mostly within either Point Reyes National Seashore or the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. Marin's coastal zone is incredibly rich in coastal resources, including, next slide, a thriving agricultural economy dominated by existing family farming operations, next slide, a rich tapestry of sensitive biological resources, including dunes, such as at Limantor Beach, woodlands, including along the popular Bear Valley Trail, open meadows, bluffs, and riparian areas, including at Abbott's Lagoon. Next slide. The county contains extensive visitor-serving uses that provide both vital recreational and commercial opportunities for the nearly 8 million residents of the Greater Bay Area and visitors from around the world, and broad swaths of land subject to coastal hazards. Next slide. Including development protected by structural armoring, low-lying areas subject to flooding, and bluffs susceptible to erosion, including at Bolinas, all exacerbated by the effects of sea level rise. Therefore, this IP amendment and the larger LCP amendment package has been reviewed under the context that it must implement Coastal Act protections for a coastal zone of both large physical size and of broad coastal resource concern. With this context and background, I'll next provide an overview of the particularly important coastal resource protection issues within the IP and the suggested modifications required to achieve LUP consistency. Slide 9, please. Agriculture is one of the primary uses of land within the Marin Coastal Zone. The LCP implements its agricultural protection standards primarily through the Coastal Agricultural Production Zone, or CAPZ, zoning district. This single zoning district comprises nearly 2/3 of the non-federally owned coastal zone and contains the vast majority of Marin's existing agricultural lands. Marin's ag land is used primarily for livestock grazing rather than row crops because of the limited availability of prime ag land and limitations on water supply availability. The Commission's conditionally certified LUP contains a detailed agricultural protection framework. The LUP identifies the APZ zoning district as the primary ag zone, specifies the allowable uses within the zone, the permitting status for those uses, and a hierarchy of required development standards. The LUP policies focus on the protection and enhancement of the family farm, and thus the family farm is the metric by which the Coastal Act's agricultural protection standards are based. Slide 10, please. Many IP suggested modifications only rearrange in which IP section the standards are listed for clarity purposes, including ensuring that all applicable provisions for development within the APZ district are located in one IP section. Similarly, another group of modifications are those that are required to make an IP standard consistent with its corresponding LUP policy. Basically, the change to the IP must be made to reflect the suggested modification made in the land use plan. For example, LUP modifications that address the protection of agricultural production and not just agricultural use, the 27-unit intergenerational home cap, and allowing only one farmhouse per farmer, among others, must be made in the IP. Finally, other modifications provide additional detail and specificity in order to effectively implement broad LUP policy requirements. IP language is thus added to ensure that development is clustered within the farm, to ensure that principally permitted agricultural development meets objective enforceable standards, and to define where agricultural products used in processing and sales facilities may come from. The suggested IP language goes into depth on these issues, including specifying application and permit condition requirements in order to ensure proper implementation of the conditionally certified land use plan. Slide 11, please. Of particular importance is the manner in which the IP implements the LUP requirement that only a single farmhouse be allowed per farm owner or operator. Land Use Plan Policy Ag 5 allows only a single farmhouse or a combination of one farmhouse and up to 2 intergenerational homes per farm owner or operator, regardless of the number of legal lots he or she owns. All farmhouses and intergenerational homes must be owned by a farmer or operator actively and directly engaged in agricultural use of the property. The concept is centered around the family farming operation, in that farmers are allowed to live on the property they farm. A farm may consist of one legal lot, or it may consist of multiple legal lots that together constitute one unified farming operation. Regardless of how many lots constitute the farmer is allowed one farmhouse. The policy serves as a proactive mechanism to avoid the potential for a farmer to own multiple farmhouses spread across multiple legal agricultural lots. Like the existing certified land use plan, the conditionally certified LUP policy is intended to avoid build-out spread across the county's agricultural lands, since doing so would inefficiently utilize agriculturally productive land, public infrastructure, and public services. However, in order to allow for others to live on that farm, including family members, the farmer is also allowed to build up to 2 intergenerational housing units, subject to size, minimum density, and clustering requirements. Slide 12, please. The IP as modified defines the process by which the farmhouse intergenerational home allowance is implemented, including the application and permitting process. The IP requires an applicant to identify the parcels that he or she owns that constitute the farm, identify that he or she is a farmer actively and directly engaged in agricultural use, and identify whether and where any ag dwellings currently exist on those parcels. An intergenerational home must be located on the same parcel as the existing farmhouse, and any approval for a farmhouse or intergenerational home must include a deed restriction that ensures the legal lot containing the dwelling remains confined to agriculture, that the owner remains actively and directly engaged in agricultural use, and that the property containing the dwelling not be further divided. These standards ensure implementation of the land use plan's detailed agricultural dwelling unit requirements and guard against farmhouses being converted to residential estates. The IP's agricultural dwelling unit standards are consistent with and help implement the county's and commission's desires to protect and enhance Marin's family farming operations and strike a balance between providing for the express needs of family farmers to live on their farms and ensuring that approved development strengthens the long-term viability of the county's agricultural economy. Slide 13, please. Finally, with respect to permitting associated with agricultural activities, the IP defines development to include changes in use, changes in intensity of use, and grading, including into an area that has not previously been farmed. Therefore, ongoing agricultural production activities, such as grading, on land where such activities have been routinely performed do not require a coastal development permit. However, new agricultural uses on land not previously used for those activities, including establishing crop production such as viticulture on lands not previously used for crop production, would constitute a change in the intensity of use of land or water, and along with any associated grading, is new development requiring a CDP. Staff expects that most existing farming operations will fall into the category of ongoing agricultural production activities that do not need a coastal permit. However, even if an agricultural activity requires a CDP, the IP offers many tools to streamline the permitting process. The Commission issued the county 2 categorical exclusion orders, which exclude from coastal permit requirements, subject to specified criteria, agriculturally related development, including production activities and barns. For those projects that cannot be excluded, the IP offers other tools to streamline the process, including the use of the de minimis waiver process and a public hearing waiver process. To summarize, the IP as modified sets up a structure in which a CDP is not required for ongoing agricultural production activities. Many new activities may be excluded from requiring a permit, and even if a CDP is required, it can be waived or deemed minor if applicable. This structure meets coastal resource protection goals and maximizes public participation consistent with the Coastal Act and the conditionally certified land use plan. In summary, as modified, the IP includes a detailed set of standards that implements the LUP's strong agricultural protection policies and will ensure the continued protection and productivity of Marin's coastal agriculture. Slide 14, please. On to biological resources. The conditionally approved land use plan includes a detailed set of policies that protects the county's significant sensitive habitats, primarily through updated and refined designation and protection of environmentally sensitive habitat areas, or ESHA, including limiting the allowed uses within ESHA to solely that which is allowed per the Coastal Act, and requiring buffers around ESHA of a minimum of 100 feet for streams and wetlands and 50 feet for other ESHA types. Importantly, the approved land use plan allows buffers to be reduced, provided the reduced buffer meets stringent conditions, including that it adequately protects the habitat and improves existing conditions. Slide 15, please. In general, while the proposed IP implements the conditionally approved LUP's biological standards, certain modifications are necessary to be fully consistent. For example, the proposed IP indicates that development must be sited and designed to avoid impacts to ESHA, but then goes on to state that if there is no feasible alternative that can avoid significant impacts, then the alternative that results in the least impacts shall be selected. This standard could be interpreted to mean that any development could be allowed within ESHA so long as the county determines that it is least environmentally damaging. However, mitigating for ESHA habitat loss is only allowed for those uses specifically allowed in ESHA per the LUP and when there are no feasible alternatives. In other words, mitigation cannot remedy the impact of an impermissible use. The IP is thus modified to make clear that mitigation is only allowed for uses that are otherwise allowable in ESHA in the first place. Similarly, an additional modification further clarifies buffer reduction standards. The buffer reduction concept has raised some concern for members of the public, and staff concurs that reductions must only be allowed where exacting criteria and requirements are met. Modifications are added to state that buffer reductions must be supported by specific findings demonstrating the need for the reduction, that buffers may only be reduced by the minimum necessary, and that buffer reductions are only permissible if they prevent impacts that degrade the ESHA and are compatible with the continuance of the ESHA. As modified, the IP includes a clear set of policies and standards for protecting biological resources as directed by the approved land use plan. Slide 16, please. Moving on next to the IP's environmental hazards standards, which is another key Coastal Act, land use plan, and county coastal resource concern. The Commission's land use plan approval included a very detailed set of standards to ensure that development is safely sited and designed. The conditionally certified LUP requires new development to be safe from geologic or other hazards for a minimum of 100 years. Development within blufftop and shoreline areas must also demonstrate that it is set back from the shoreline or bluff edge for the 100-year period without factoring in any existing or proposed shoreline protective devices. The LUP details the criteria for allowing shoreline protection, including what uses are allowed structural protection, mitigation requirements, and design standards. Finally, the conditionally certified LUP includes a suite of policies addressing existing development currently located in hazardous areas. Such development may be repaired and maintained, but when 50% or more of the major structural components are altered, the structure is considered to be redeveloped, and the entire structure must be found consistent with all applicable LCP policies. The conditionally certified land use plan includes an extensive policy framework that mirrors many of the suggested policy mechanisms and best practices outlined in the Commission's draft Sea Level Rise policy guidance. Slide 17, please. The proposed IP, as suggested to be modified, adequately implements the LUP's coastal hazards policies. Because of the LUP's details, most of the modifications needed are to clarify the application review process, as well as definition of certain terms. In terms of articulating the process for such hazards evaluation, as modified, the IP sets forth 3 sequences of review. First, each CDP application would undergo an initial screening assessment to determine whether the site proposed for development may be subject to hazards. The assessment would include a review of reports, resource maps, aerial photographs, site inspection, and the county's hazards maps, all using the best available science. Second, if the initial site assessment screening indicates the proposed development is located in an area that may be subject to hazards, an environmental hazards report must be prepared. The report is to be prepared by a qualified professional and is intended to describe the extent of potential hazards on the site over the minimum 100-year time frame, and to ensure that applicable hazards avoidance criteria are met. Third, development proposed within blufftop and shoreline areas must also prepare a coastal hazards analysis, which, among other requirements, lists the CDP conditions necessary to ensure that the structure is relocated and/or removed and the site restored whenever the development is deemed hazardous and unsafe for human occupancy. The Commission has used such relocation requirements in recent years to ensure that development adequately and proactively addresses end-of-life concerns. Finally, a definition of coastal redevelopment is proposed and builds upon the substantial detail in this regard in the approved land use plan. The proposed definition describes what elements are and are not considered to be major structural components, and the alterations to them that would trigger the coastal redevelopment policy. Furthermore, in order to address concerns about differing standards between the LCP's structural component framework and that which is mandated by per FEMA requirements, which calculates new development based on a cost model, a structure is also considered to be redeveloped when the alteration meets applicable FEMA requirements. As modified, the coastal redevelopment policy is triggered when the development includes work on the major structural components, for example, when 50% of the linear length of a wall is removed, or if it meets applicable FEMA thresholds based on a 50% cost relative to market value. With these modifications, the IP adequately implements corresponding conditionally certified LUP policies, which state the required parameters, metrics, and findings that must be made to ensure new development is safely located. Slide 18, please. The Coastal Act defines the activities that constitute development, requires a coastal development permit that is consistent with the local government's commission-certified local coastal program for the activities that meet the definition of development, and then lists the different types of CDPs. The Coastal Act's implementing regulations specify permitting procedures, including required noticing, hearing dates, and appeal procedures. IP Chapters 2268 and 2270, as submitted by the county, offer a detailed set of CDP procedures, including listing 6 types of permit categories and the hearing and noticing requirements for each. First, categorical exclusions for development that is specifically listed within the county's commission-adopted categorical exclusion orders as not requiring a CDP. Second, exemptions for development that is specifically listed under the Coastal Act and its regulations as being exempt from CDP requirements. Third, de minimis waivers for development that has no coastal resource impact and therefore the CDP can be waived. Fourth, non-public hearing applications for development that is not appealable to the Coastal Commission and therefore does not require a public hearing. Fifth, public hearing applications for development that is appealable to the Coastal Commission and therefore requires a hearing. And finally, a public hearing waiver application in which, although the proposed development is appealable to the Commission, it meets certain criteria allowing the normally required public hearing to be waived. Slide 19, please. Some aspects of the proposed procedures need additional clarity for conformance with the Coastal Act and its regulations, particularly with respect to the process by which certain notices will be distributed to the public and the Commission for maximum public participation. Recommended modifications clarify and enhance noticing procedures, as well as the ability of interested persons to track and, if necessary, challenge or appeal county decisions. In order to provide maximum public participation, all permit category determinations are subject to challenge to the Commission, and all county CDP decisions are appealable locally, and if appealed, would trigger a required public hearing. Some county actions may also be appealable to the Commission after all local appeals have been exhausted. Other modifications to the CDP procedures chapters address emergency permits, temporary events, definition of development designated as principally permitted in a zoning district, land divisions, nonconforming structures, and potential takings analysis. As modified, the IP identifies the process by which it will carry out its LCP, including by specifying the different types of CDPs and their corresponding hearing and noticing requirements, and allows for challenge and appeal, all with the goal of maximizing public participation consistent with the LUP and the Coastal Act. Slide 20, please. In addition to the agriculture, biological resources, environmental hazards, and coastal development permit procedures provisions summarized previously, the proposed IP also implements updated LUP policies related to the provision of adequate public services, visual resource protection, public recreation, public access, and other coastal resource concerns. In general, the standards within these IP chapters cross-reference the corresponding LUP policy and are therefore consistent with the LUP. In these IP chapters, most of staff's suggested modifications clarify terms and requirements. Slide 21, please. In conclusion, Marin County has prepared and submitted a significant update to its implementation plan, one that has been evaluated at the local level through dozens of public forums over the past 7 years. Commission staff has worked closely with county staff over the course of this time and has continued to work closely with both the county and with the public after the proposed IP was submitted to the Commission for consideration. The end result of this collaboration is an IP as suggested to be modified that should serve to ably protect the significant coastal resources of the Marin County coastal zone for years to come, as well as maximize the public's participation in this coastal resource protection process. If modified as suggested in the staff report, the IP is consistent with and adequate to carry out the policies of the conditionally certified land use plan, as that document was approved with suggested modifications by the Commission at its May 15th, 2014 hearing. Staff recommends that the Commission hold a public hearing and approve the IP subject to modifications. This will require the Commission to deny the IP as submitted and then approve it if modified to incorporate the suggested modifications. The motions to accomplish this are on page 10 of the staff report, and this concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Kevin. And I'm going to be asking for ex partes at this time, which is a term, and I'm reminded as I ask for that, for those of you in the audience and those watching on our webcast, you can see that Coastal Commission work is a different language altogether. And I want to just say that there are a few people who've mastered it, and Kevin is one. And I do want to acknowledge that we work within a remarkable legal and administrative structure. And so some of the times the conversation can seem quite difficult to follow for those in the public, but the issues are very much our own and all of ours. And so I want to thank the staff for their presentation and ask for ex partes beginning on my left. Any ex partes down here? Down here? Okay. Commissioner Bochco?
Yes, on April 15th, I think, no, April 15th, I didn't write down the date, I'm sorry. I talked to Amy Trainer on the telephone, and we went over her letter and other submissions that went to staff as well as the rest of the commission, going through the points of the positions of EAC on various issues, grazing versus row crops. She wanted to be very clear that the EAC does support family farming, and farming has thrived partly because of the amount of public input, and she wants to be able to assure that the public input continues under the LCP. Yeah, and then the rest of it was pretty much what was in her letters. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Schallenberger?
Yes, on Tuesday, the 14th at 6 o'clock, I had a phone conversation with Amy Trainer of the Environmental Action Committee of West Marin. It was consistent with what Commissioner Bochco has already reported in terms of their strong support of agriculture in Marin County and their recommendations for supporting the staff recommendation, her support of the staff recommendations. She was looking for a few changes in those staff recommendations, all of which were laid out in the letter that we received. She felt that there needed to be meaningful standards for viticulture, if viticulture is allowed, and that there needed to be, the public view shed needed to be defined with objective standards so that it was very clear how to protect the public view shed. And that was it. Thank you.
Any others in that direction? No? Okay. I have one ex parte, and that was with Amy Trainer. On Tuesday, the 14th, at around 3 p.m., we had a phone conversation. We discussed the process. We discussed EAC's interest and support for ongoing agriculture. Feels that the level of the conditions as written today represent a significant compromise already, and feels strongly about issues around conversion from row crops. Thinking 2 row crops in areas that may have been pasture should require a CDP. Water and visual resource issues are really important as a part of that, and that's why the process should have that. And thinks that family farming is thriving and it will continue to thrive. Wants water impacts evaluated with the coastal development permit. Recognizes that West Marin is special, and I think there's no question that that's true. And then goes on about viticulture, needing to have LCP standards, wanting oysters to be only permitted for those that are grown locally. Still concerned about the ESHA buffer, and thinks more protections need to be there for visual resources. She also mentioned that they would submit a letter, had submitted a letter and an addendum. Thank you. If that is all the ex partes, then we move into the public comment, and that is to begin with the applicant, which in this case is the Community Development Agency for Marin County. On behalf of the Board of Supervisors, I welcome Brian Crawford and ask how much time would you like?
Chair Kinsey, I think 15 minutes would be suffice, although I'd like to reserve a bit of time towards the end of the meeting to follow up on any comments and responses and open myself to questions.
So 15 and 5 minutes on a rebuttal?
5 to 10, yeah.
Okay.
That would be fine.
7.
So,
All right.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Kinsey, members of the Commission, Brian Crawford with the Community Development Agency staff. I want to begin by thanking Dr. Lester and his staff, Dan, Kevin, Nancy, and I'm probably leaving out 2 or 3 people who have put a tremendous amount of work into this document, as our staff has, and we look forward to continuing to work with your Coastal Commission staff on some important issues that, few of which, the principal issues, I'll be addressing to you briefly this afternoon. We handed out a paper to you. It's appropriately colored blue since we're having a Coastal Commission hearing. And the main purpose of this document, it's entitled Marin County's Requested Motion, is to request a continuance of today's hearing. And there are several good reasons that we're asking for that. First of all, our Board of Supervisors has not accepted the land use plan that your commission adopted back in May in Inverness, as you may recall. And we still have some outstanding issues regarding the environmental hazards section of that report. Most of those revolve around the definition of redevelopment. As you may recall, some of those changes got into the LUP very shortly before its adoption, and we've had some time to consider it since then, concerns that we want to work out. And I understand in speaking with your staff this morning that that having some discussion toward the end of the hearing about how that may happen under different procedures would be warranted, so we're certainly welcome to that. Secondly, we continue to have some concerns about our ability to digest and fully analyze all of the material that's in the staff report, even though we have been working with your staff closely for several months on a number of issues. But as you can tell by the breadth of the staff report and the amount of detail in here, and the devil is in the detail, and any time you're working with a zoning ordinance, I think just the sheer volume of material deserves more time. We only do this thing every 30 to 35 years, and so we want to get it right. Thirdly, we're in the process of identifying solutions and providing answers to some of these questions. And we recognize that involves close coordination with your staff. We think they're prepared to do that with us based on our conversations. And then finally, you have a hearing in November, which would provide a local venue for vetting some of these issues. Again, I think we have to have a discussion before any kind of decision gets made on a continuance hearing, assuming that you're you're going to make that action today. So our goal is to continue to work with your staff and come back in the best of both worlds with a consensus plan, or short of that, a plan that at least minimizes the issues, narrows the gap further to make your job easier to approve this document, and then ultimately, of course, to make my job easier to convince my Board of Supervisors as to whether or not they should accept the document or reject it. And of course, our mutual goal here is acceptance. So while we don't want you to adopt the IP today, we do want you to use this hearing to speak to some of the principal issues around agriculture that we've been focusing on. The single biggest issue is how to regulate ongoing agriculture, and in particular, how changes to ag use are made. This is an important point because agricultural producers need to have the flexibility to make changes to their production activities based upon market factors, growing seasons, other things that I'm less articulate about, but you'll hear from, no doubt, from some of the producers in the audience. And those factors don't always align with the cost and the timeframes for processing coastal permits. And some may say very infrequently do that. So if you don't balance the flexibility of those kind of needs for ag producers with the our continued commitment to uphold the Coastal Act in its entirety, including protecting ESHAs and views and public access, our ag producers may be prevented from making changes to their operations that will help them stay in business. And I know that both the county and the Coastal Commission have a mutual commitment to continuing ag, and we both recognize that agriculture is a priority use in the Coastal Act, just as protecting natural resources is. And I think some of that mutual commitment is in evidence in the changes that your staff has made to one or two of the provisions that I'm going to be speaking to this morning. We appreciate that. However, we're proposing a further revision to the ongoing ag exemption provision. We think that it'll strike a better balance between meeting ag producers' needs, making sure that we're doing right by the Coastal Act, and trying to meet your staff halfway in that regard. So one of those, actually both of the ag issues are also listed in this blue sheet that we handed out this morning. The first one I want to speak to is really on page 2. We have a little bit out of order. It's item number B. So this provision would provide a different definition of ongoing agriculture for the purposes of exempting routine, typical ongoing ag production activities and future activities by allowing ag producers to continue what they're doing now as it presently exists. And I think we're consistent with your staff in that regard. I think that that's a commonality that you'll find between their version of this ag exemption provision and what we're proposing. Where the difference lies is that we're proposing to allow new or renewed agricultural production activities to continue as they presently exist or would exist in the future, as long as they don't involve more than routine cultivation practices, meaning tilling, planting, seeding, but not meaning any type of significant grading. And our focus here is on avoiding terracing and vineyards, because we know that's been a big concern, although in Marin County we certainly don't have the type of soils conditions and weathers and other factors that would produce large-scale wineries that you would see in Sonoma and Napa County. So that provision would allow ag producers to manage their land according to their needs, whether it's converting former pasture land to growing silage and hay in order to either retain their organic certification if it's a dairy, or to newly certify their dairy as organic, or to lease small tracts of land. And in Marin, that's typically 5 to 10 acres to new farmers who are coming into the market and growing value-added crops without having to subject those types of projects to what can be time-consuming and very expensive permit reviews process. At the same time, we think it would address what I think is the most important concern about how we regulate this activity, which is protection of eshes. As I mentioned earlier, new or renewed ag can continue on the farm as long as it does not extend into new areas where we have eshes and ESHA buffers. I want to close that issue by just pointing out we're trying to hit a sweet spot here in terms of that balancing. And my concern is that if we end up with an approach that's over-regulatory and burdensome to ag owners, that it's really going to the burden really is going to fall on ag producers to justify the choices they make between different types of ag products. And they may not choose to come forward in the future because of the hurdles that they have to place. And over time, what we definitely don't want to see is if the problems with making changes in ag use and diversification, which frankly are a key to continuing ag in the county, become so difficult that we may see a very gradual transition from productive agriculture to open space. And I know we all in this room want to avoid that. The second issue is a little more specific. It has to do with the farmhouses and modifications to define the farm as all parcels owned either in total or partial fee ownership, including both contiguous and non-contiguous parcels, for the purposes of filing an application for a farmhouse. In our view, the farm should be defined as consisting of contiguously owned parcels and not separate parcels that may be located 20 miles away and where a farmer or rancher has a very small partial fee ownership in the land. And we question whether or not the way this standard has been constructed will actually achieve the goal of maintaining agricultural land in large enough acreages to continue and enhance ag production. One of the problems that we see in the way the IP language is crafted now is that it appears to make it a requirement that all parcels that an application for a farmhouse would have to be filed would have to include parcels where there is a partial fee ownership, and it could be very small, just to be able to complete an application. Also, to give you an example that has come to mind in thinking through how this particular provision would apply in a very practical sense, if a farmer who owns a ranch in Point Reyes Station, let's say, we think may be prevented from proposing a farmhouse on his property and on his ranch, which may consist of one or more contiguously owned parcels. If he had a small ownership, let's say a 25%, 10% ownership on a ranch in Tamales where his sister or brother lived, and there was a farmhouse on that non-contiguously owned parcel, because the rules say you only get one farmhouse and 2 intergenerational homes per farm. But keep in mind, farm means non-contiguous lands under common ownership and where we have either total fee or partial fee. I know that sounds a little convoluted, but believe me, if I could translate this to you in a better way, I would try. I feel like I'm a little, perhaps, disadvantaged in that regard. So our preference would be to simply say that all parcels in common ownership generically, like we do in our master plan ordinances, constitute the farm. So at least we have some discretion, initial discretion, to decide whether all parcels in which applicants have any ownership need to be included in the application, and we may find some reasons in analyzing an actual development where we can make intelligent and rational decisions behind that. So those are the 2 big issues that we've been focusing on. I think that's the good news. However, what I've just described to you is not the totality of all of our concerns. There are other issues that we would like to work out with your staff. For example, you may have noticed in some of the materials that came to you yesterday, there are some administrative procedures that we're concerned about that may eliminate some flexibility in making judgments about land use consistency in the context of our land use tables, whether something is even allowed or not. Some of the procedures for reporting notices of final action to the commission seem cumbersome to us in terms of the amount of information we would have to include in the package of material that would go to the commission. And there's some terminology that we think is imprecise and could be improved upon. I'm optimistic that a number of those could be resolved just in working with your staff. Those are less substantive. And I bring those concerns to you not to engage you or your staff in a detailed conversation about the intricacies of those, because you don't have the time for it and probably not the patience. And this is not the venue to get into doing that type of work. We'd like to work with your staff on that. But I just wanted to give you a flavor of some of the other issues that we have. I mentioned earlier the environmental hazards concerns and in particular the redevelopment, coastal redevelopment definition. We'd really like to work on that further to try to develop a better interim solution. Our ultimate goal, as you may know, is that we're working on a sea level rise study in West Marin, and our goal is to use that as a vehicle for developing a more refined and nuanced approach to how we regulate additions and remodels to existing structures that are in these hazards area. So we'd like that work to play out as well. But in closing, I want to say we're committed to working hard to come back with solutions to you. And I think we're on the right course, but we're just not quite there yet. Ultimately, we want a process that works for both your commission and the county. And we're confident that through our mutual work together with your staff that we can improve upon things. I'm certainly not making guarantees that we can solve each and every problem, but I think it would benefit all of us if we spend a little more time doing some additional work on these issues. We've really appreciated working with your staff. We're optimistic we can continue to do that and come back to you at a future hearing date. So those are my remarks. I want to thank again Dr. Lester, his staff, and I want to thank all of you commissioners for your attention to these issues. And again, if I could have a bit of time at the end of the hearing, I would appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We now have a number of speaker cards, and I wanted to start by thanking the staff who took in the request to speak cards today. The timing was placed on each card, so the fairness factor is well established here. I'm starting with Aaron, who was up before us before, arrived at 8:30, magnificent. And we're going to go through all of these in the order in which they were received, and there are several that are bundles so that a single person can speak for a group. Good morning and welcome. And again, I'd remind folks of a few things, housekeeping before. Please state your name for the record. That's very helpful to us. And then also we have a general tradition here where we don't get into clapping, booing, hissing, or other things. We do allow a lot of hand movement, up, down, whatever, but we're trying to maintain a decorum, so we'd appreciate your support and allow us to be the ones that misbehave. Very good. Welcome. Please, we'll be talking 2 minutes per speaker, and Aaron, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. My name is Aaron Wilder. I run Tabletop Farm in Point Reyes Station. I have 5 different plots and have been working as a farmer since 2009. In the last 2 years, it has been my full-time occupation, and the amount and diversity of lands that I farm on, and I lease all of them, has enabled me to run a productive and successful organic small farming operation. I'm just here to say that I think that some of the language in the policy around getting a CDP every time a new use is happens on land that has historically previously not had any cropping, for example, would have been a bit cumbersome for me as a new small farmer to do. The de minimis requirement, I don't know if that would apply to what I do. I'm obviously not doing grapes, and then the public hearing waiver might also, if it lasts for longer than a certain period of time, like if it takes a year or something like that, it would be a disincentive to me. It would have been to to start the farms that I started that make up all the crops that I grow, that I sell. So, and I probably would not have started. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to invite up Kirk Wilbur from the, I'm just looking at the numbers of cards. You have, we'll have 4 minutes, and then Sam Dolcini will follow, followed by David Carlson.
All right, my name is Kirk Wilbur. I'm with the California Cattlemen's Association. Thank you, Chair Kinsey and Commissioners, for the opportunity to speak to you today on this very important issue. I would first like to join Mr. Crawford's recommendation and request for a continuation of this matter. I appreciate you guys agendizing this matter today so that Marin County residents can address you on a Marin County land use plan and implementation plan. But I think because of the sheer amount of information, the nearly 800-page staff report, it's useful not only for stakeholders but also for the commissioners yourselves to have a little bit additional time to really digest that staff report. And as I'm sure you all know, you have, according to the good cause extension you took last year, until July to make your decision on this implementation plan. So I would hope that you can defer it until May, June, or July's commission hearing for a final decision. Next, I want to bring your attention to 2 particular facts contained within the Coastal Act itself. The first is that according to the Coastal Act, any substantive content of a local coastal plan, including the implementation plan, is solely vested in the county to create. Secondly, as Mr. Kahn stated earlier, I want to draw your attention to the fact that your standard of review for this implementation plan is the extent to which the county's proposed plan conforms to the conditionally approved LUP that you approved last May. The reason I bring these 2 facts up is because I believe there are numerous instances in the staff's implementation plan recommendations where they have exceeded that standard of review by suggesting substantive changes to the implementation plan. Certainly, the Coastal Act does give you the authority to suggest IP amendments to the county, for instance, in your conditional approval of the IP. However, those recommendations, those amendments to the county, are limited to that standard of review, which is to ensure that the implementation plan conforms to that conditionally approved land use plan. There's a few examples that I've identified so far of where staff's recommendations are substantive in nature and are not absolutely necessary to ensure that the IP conforms to the land use plan. A few of those are definitions of what constitutes development necessary for agricultural production, what constitutes ongoing agricultural production activities for the purpose of qualifying for an exemption to the coastal development permit requirement, and also the definition of what constitutes a farm for purposes of agricultural dwelling units. These definitions that have been proposed in staff's recommended IP changes are substantive in nature, and thus they should be rejected by the Commission because they fall outside of the authority vested in you by the Coastal Act. Not only should these definitions that are substantive in nature fall, you should, reconsider the substantive regulations in the implementation plan which are informed by those definitions. I want to move on to one particular issue, which is this issue of ongoing agricultural production, what it is for purposes of what routine agricultural activities are exempt from a coastal development permit. Staff has recommended an amendment to this regulation that would limit those exemptions to agricultural activities not discontinued for more than the previous 10 years. First of all, I'd point out this definition is a substantive change that is not necessary for conformance to the LUP and should fall for that reason based on your standard of review. Secondly, however, I'd note that there are many reasons that routine agricultural activities may cease for 10 or more years. It could be economic hardships, it could be problems in the family such as death or illness, it could be ecological concerns such as the severe drought that we have right now. I think it's dangerous to penalize agricultural producers simply because a particular routine agricultural activity may be ceased for 10 or more years. I thank you for your time, and I hope that you will, again, defer this action until May, June, or July.
Thank you. Sam Dolcini?
Good morning, Chairman Kinsey and Commissioners. My name is Sam Dolcini, and I'm here in my official capacity today as the President of the Marin County Farm Bureau, but I also wear a couple other hats. I am a current board member of the Marin Agricultural Land Trust and a past chairman of that same organization. I'm also a member of a family that has been producing food since the 1850s in Marin County, over 160 years. Oh, I forgot to do the time thing. Oh, that's right. I'm using the time of Jerry Corda.
Please go ahead, yes.
Jerry
That's fine.
Corda,
We'll
Steve
keep it
Knutson, and Vivian Strauss.
Thank you. I'll work that out. Go ahead.
Not an issue. So been a part of an agricultural family producing food in Marin County for over 160 years. And on a globe where millions of people go to bed hungry every night, that is the fact of which I'm most proud. I find it interesting that this staff report talks about the fact that ag in West Marin is thriving. Somehow I think our family must have missed that memo. When you look at actual incomes that have gone up recently, when you compare them to the 1970s, we have done a little more than keep up with inflation in an area where everything else has skyrocketed beyond our reach for those of us that want to do things like maybe buy a house in town someday. Many of us have been actively involved in attempting to craft a local plan that will help keep our industry alive and reflect the needs that our industry has to remain active. And the question comes to mind, are we still going to be partners moving forward in preserving something so near and dear in West Marin County, or have those of us that have stayed in business become little more than victims of somebody else's agenda? We come to you today in the letter that has been distributed with a handful of items that are of extreme importance to us. The first of which that has already been touched on briefly is the need to receive a coastal permit for the change in agricultural activities not done in the last 10 years. Number one, it will be difficult to determine what has or has not occurred in those last 10 years. And it is a little ironic that we'd be asked to get an agricultural permit from a non-agricultural body that does not have an agricultural expert on its staff. We're in a county where we have water districts that have unmanaged weed problems, a road department that can't control Scotch broom, open space that has their own issues, a national park that can't control their elk. I think you may understand why we're a little cynical when we were asked to partner with the Coastal Commission on an agricultural question on our own ranches. Our family started, we also have issues with the concept of merging parcels. Despite the fact that the county has requested that it be only contiguous parcels, we, even as an agricultural community, have a huge challenge with that. The concept of asking us to merge parcels will do little more than gut the Ag 60 zoning that we have been working successfully with since the 1970s. And let us not forget that the Ag 60 zoning was held up in the Superior Court because at that point in time, the court asked one simple question. Could a dairy in West Marin be successful on 60 acres? That answer was yes. That zoning stood. One would think that we would not get that same answer from the court today. What I also like, one of the challenges that this does, if a family is faced with the thought of merging all their parcels, if you are on a small parcel, it would have no effect. If you're on a larger parcel, it would devastate you. So there's complete inequality in how this would affect different landowners with different numbers of parcels. It could lead to three things. One, an attempt for people to sell off parcels before they would attempt to build houses. Two, completely discourage them because of the economic loss that you would occur when being asked to merge parcels. In the worst case scenario, rather than them feeling comfortable building more housing, they might be motivated to sell the ranch outright. And that is something I think that any of us would see as a major negative. We do appreciate the fact that you're considering allowing on-farm processing and roadside stands, but let us not forget those projects will fall under the entire review of the County of Marin. So just because they are in this document does not mean that farm stands will be popping up in West Marin tomorrow. They, like anything else, will go through the entire county review process. What we ask for in general is we need to have also flexibility in this plan so we can take on normal grading practices so that we can do water quality work to meet with requirements of other state and federal regulatory agencies that we have to deal with. In conclusion, when I attended the first hearing over 8 years ago with Jack Liebster and others at the Dance Palace in Point Reyes, speaker after speaker after speaker before me walked to the microphone and described how they fell in love with the beauty of West Marin the first time that they came and visited. I cannot tell you what West Marin looked like because I was brought home from the hospital. My father cannot tell you what West Marin looked like the first time he saw it. He was being brought home from the hospital after being born. My grandfather's situation was different. He was born on the ranch but had that same issue. You need to go back 4 generations in my family before you find the first person that arrived to this county. All those speakers before me, we welcomed into the county without any exception. The only thing we've ever complained about or tried to stop were reservoirs that flooded our farm ground and the big red bridge from San Francisco that my grandmother didn't think was a good idea. What I ask for is that you provide the agricultural community with the same thing all those speakers that went to the podium before me 8 years ago found when they came to Marin County. That is an opportunity. They had an opportunity to move to West Marin, build homes, start families, start businesses. We ask that you provide the agricultural community, the community that's brought you this far, with the same opportunity to keep our heritage, our businesses, and our families alive and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Freitas, followed by Peter Martinelli, and then David Carlson. Great to see you, David.
David Freitas. I live in San Rafael. My mother told me, don't ever follow an act you can't top. And I wish you would put my name someplace else after,
You came at the wrong time, pal.
after Sam. My family started in the dairy business in Marin County in 1881. And for the next 80 years, 3 generations improved upon that and stayed in that business to the point where there were 6 operating ranches at one time, all devoted to dairy. I was raised on one, and when I was raised, the chief business in Marin County, the main industry was dairy. Today, I don't think you can find a non-organic cow to milk in Marin County. Things change, and I think the only constant perhaps there is in agriculture is change. And I've seen over the years that now in Marin, the farmers are basically, as you probably know even better than I, 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation small farmers. They've proven their stewardship by the way they've maintained and protected that land over those generations, and they've proven their devotion to the land that they plow. I practiced law here in Marin for 40 years and represented numerous ranchers and farmers over the years. I've seen how they take care of their properties. I've seen how they ache to have the next generation take over what they're doing and to protect the land for them. And they've proven again to you, I think, their stewardship and their devotion to that land. I want to just comment on 2 points that I saw in this staff report. One is that 10-year requirement about the change in production. I practice law, as I say, I retired 10 years ago, but it took me 10 times to read that to understand it, and I'm not sure I do now. But
You do understand time limits, so give us the second point.
I will.
Yes, thank you.
It seems to me on that first one, if I could stay with that for a second, what you really want there is infrastructure. The second point, and that is not to forget the production, but if the infrastructure can take the change, that's what you're interested in.
I'm going to ask you, thank you, David. We have so many speakers, I do have to
understand.
ask you to be fair. I need to ask you to step
Thank you
down.
very
but
much for the
Thank you
opportunity.
for being here and speaking. Peter Martinelli, and followed by David Carlson, and then Nancy Scolari.
Good morning, Commissioners. Commissioner Kinsey, do I have any kind of bundle or extra time?
You don't now, but if somebody's name is in here that wants to give you some time.
Okay,
Judy-
one's fine.
who-
I'll take the
and then-
floor.
Okay.
Yeah. My name is Peter Martinelli. I'm a row crop farmer down in Bolinas, and I'm also on the board of the Marin Agricultural Land Trust. and the Farm Bureau, and on the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, I'm the stewardship chairman and work with a lot of these issues. I'm just going to pick up where my friend David Freitas left off regarding the 10-year phase-out of the flexibility, of the options to change use on land. And I know you guys have been hammered by some of our friends on the other side about how going from row crop, or pasture to row crop, is there something that needs to be reviewed about that? And I have to say, I would not be in business if I did not start scratching around on a quarter acre of pasture. We were a cattle farm for 20 years. We were a row crop farm in the 60s. And then I took it back to row crops. And a barrier like this requirement to have a permit to change that use, I wouldn't have gone into business. And I think Dave Freitas hit the nail. It's really, are the resources on the ranch capable of supporting the change? And I think that's what the language of the staff report goes a long way in that direction, and I compliment them for that. Also, I noticed in a op-ed or a letter to the editor by Amy Trainer, she started to go in that direction of recognizing ongoing ag. And the point is the resource, the water. Are we terracing land? Are we making more change in that way? And I think that's where you should stop and get away from the 10-year turnaround. That doesn't help us. We have two younger, actually three of the newest farmers in our county here to speak with you today. You just heard from Aaron. You're also going to hear from Cayman, and I think, well, Guido gave me his time, so you won't hear from him. Thank you, Guido. But the point is with those guys, they started out on pastures, started doing row crops, and the resources supported their businesses. And I think we just need to leave that alone. It works. And get away from this idea that we have to go through a permit process to make a change. I think that's the business of the farmer. You know, if you're a manufacturer, you're doing condiments, let's say, and you, let's say for 10 years there's no market for your pickle relish. You're still doing ketchup and mustard, but someone else came in with a cheaper product, and suddenly in 15 years that business went away and you have a market. And you have to go back and get a permit to make your relish. You know, that makes no sense at all. I mean, that in terms of production, that's what's going on there. So in closing, I have some time. Okay. I'm in Guido's land now. So let's think about this subtle change. If we get away from 10 years and leave the flexibility to make changes with existing resources, I think we'll arrive at the same place someday down the line where the next generation and new farmers can get in, and they can get in on limited resources. And I think that's our future of farming. We need to leave the bar there for them, and that's who these changes will really affect. I also just want to touch on the grading, and that grading is a routine activity on farms and ranches, and that the County of Marin has gone a long way to try and create a standard, a number of yards, whatever, and I think we just need to accept that that's part of running a ranch. It shouldn't need a permit. Lastly, I just want to thank you, commissioners, for your attention and your effort in this. I want to thank commission staff for all their hard work, and I really appreciate it. You guys have come a long way. I also want to thank the county staff for all of their work, and I also want to thank our opponents in the room, because I think all of this, the fact that we're all out here today, shows how much we all love the coast in our different ways and how much we want to see that forward. So thanks again.
Thank you. David Carlson, followed by Nancy Scalari, and then Jeff Lomans.
Yes, my name's David Carlson. I'm a resource planner with the Santa Cruz County Planning Department. And the reason I'm here today is to offer a different perspective from another county jurisdiction on this LCP item related to coastal bluff setbacks and sea level rise. I'm leading a team working on amendments to the Santa Cruz County General Plan, LCP hazards policies, which is also part of our implementation of our climate action strategy. We're engaged with the Santa Cruz Coastal Commission staff and other stakeholders in our community. We're using the Commission's draft sea level rise policy guidance document, and I also monitor the Commission's agendas for proposed LCP documents dealing with the same issues. And after reviewing the staff report for this item and other recent items, we have a concern about a certain language proposed as suggested modifications in the staff report. In section 22.40.060, subsections A1B and A2B, suggested modifications would require that existing shoreline protective devices shall not be factored into the required analysis of bluff setback during the CDP process for redevelopment of an existing bluff-top home. The reason this is a concern for us in Santa Cruz is because we believe it represents a one-size-fits-all approach to an issue that we believe calls for different solutions based on local conditions. In response to the unique and varied conditions along Santa Cruz County's coast, we are planning to propose a policy framework that takes a more nuanced approach. Specifically, we are planning to propose a policy that allows existing legally authorized protective devices to be factored into the bluff setback analysis during the CDP process for redevelopment of an existing bluff-top home. A companion requirement would require an evaluation of the existing protective device to eliminate or mitigate adverse impacts on coastal resources, including local shoreline sand supply. Was that 2 minutes?
That was your 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can certainly submit your comments. I think it's relevant to our sea level rise guidance. You'll be coming back perhaps when we take a public comment on that in the ensuing months, probably in the next 3 months.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Scolari, followed by Jeff Lumans, then Michael Lawson. Welcome.
Greetings. I have another 2 minutes on my...
Oh, yes. There are two people.
Nancy Scolari, Marin Resource Conservation District. Our job is to provide assistance to agricultural producers in Marin County when it comes to making environmental improvements on the ranches. And over the years, we've worked in cooperation with these ranches and have been able to restore well over 20 miles of stream. 35,000 trees have been planted on these ranches, lots of gullies repaired, and sediment delivery from Tamales Bay has been reduced. So my point here today is I think that we are inadvertently disincentivizing restoration on ranching lands, and so I wanted to show you why. This is the end result. I'm using this as a typical restoration project. This is a 1 mile stretch of stream on a ranch in Marin County with buffers on both sides. A typical cost for this type of project is about $300,000. That's just for construction, none of the planning and permitting and any of that. So, why is this not working? Next slide. This is what it looked like before. Next slide. We then will put in a fence. Keep going. Tank and trough, which is generally about 5,000 gallon tank and about a 300 gallon trough. Because we're fencing out the livestock from the stream, we're putting an alternative water source. Next. A bridge to get cattle from one pasture to the next. On either side of that bridge, what isn't represented here is also a road. There's a road required. Next. Trees go in. This is 6 acres of trees on 1 mile stretch. Next. And then typically a stream bank repair of some sort, which involves some sort of biotechnical repair with vegetation and rock. Next. In order to do this kind of work, it requires permits that already are within regulatory jurisdiction. So next. The fence, no permit. Next. The Army Corps, because usually the water development where you find water, there's a wetland, and that requires a 404 permit. Next. The bridge requires 3 different permits. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. And also the stream bank repair. Because it's in a wetland, it would require a 404 permit from the Corps of Engineers. Because it's affecting water quality, it requires a 401 water quality certification. And because it affects fish and wildlife, a 1600 stream bed alteration agreement. Next. The trees do not require a permit. Next.
Yeah.
That's where the next slide comes in. So under the proposed LCP, all these practices would require permits. And so that is on top of what already exists within the regulatory framework. And what I would propose is that we, instead of disincentivizing this sort of restoration that has occurred over many years, many decades now, I would like to see that those are practices that are all exempt from the permitting process. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Lumens, followed by Michael Lawson, and then Albert Strauss.
Thank you. Could I request that Terry Houlihan's time be bundled with mine? Terry
Yes.
Houlihan from Civic. Thank you very much. I'll make my brief comments a little briefer since I don't have quite the time I expected. Chairman Kinsey, honorable commissioners, thank you for allowing me to present to you today. My name is Jeff Lumens of 167 Dipsey Road in Stinson Beach. I am a board member of the Seadrift Homeowners Association, which is an elected board representing the interests of over 200 homeowners in the Seadrift development in Stinson Beach. I'm also the representative of the Stinson Seadrift local community on the Stakeholder Advisory Committee of Marin County's C-SMART program, which was established in 2014 under program CEH 22A of the conditionally certified Marin County Land Use Plan with funding you provided to gather information on the effects of sea level rise in the county coastal zone and to propose additional policies and other actions for inclusion in the LCP. Now, both as a C-SMART SAC member and as a representative of the Seadrift Homeowners Association, I've met several times over the past year with members both of the Coastal Commission staff and with Marin County's Planning Department to discuss our concerns over sea level rise and over proposed language addressing this and other environmental hazards in the coastal zone. Subsequent to these meetings, I and our colleagues on the board have formally submitted our concerns 4 times in letters to Coastal Commission staff and the county's planning department, including suggested language revisions to the implementation plan that you have before you today. You can find those in the addenda in your packages. I was going to make further comments, but given the short time, what I'd like to change to saying is, what I ask today is that you strongly support, and we strongly support, Director Crawford's request for continuation to further consider especially the environmental hazard section, both of the LUP and of the implementation plan. We have very specific concerns on this that we've noted. We are concerned that they could constitute takings, which could lead inevitably to a series of lengthy court battles. And we don't think that this was necessarily intentional. Some of this may have simply been caused as a direct result of attempting at the last minute of the LUP process to shoehorn a new shoreline section concerned with sea level rise into the environmental hazards section. As staff's own report knows, there was a multi-year process developing the LCP, but during that, Marin County had not considered the effect of sea level rise, and so in attempts to build upon bluff top provisions to incorporate shoreline development. In the letter you got from Brian Crawford in the county earlier this week, it notes that while the LCP process was multi-year, this language came in fairly last minute. And we believe that since it was fairly hastily prepared, an attempt had been made to ameliorate the language by including the concept of the C-SMART program to rewrite and amend these sections in 2017. Let's let that process go forward. Let's put this current environmental hazard section under resubmittal. Let the community and the county, who have been doing fabulous work in the C-SMART process, as I can attest to, develop appropriate community standards that bring in the support of all constituents in the area, and let staff continue to work on these. We have submitted many revisions, and I would note that your staff has done a very good and constructive job in working with us and working towards making the necessary changes. We applaud that. We furthermore applaud the work of county staff, and we feel that with time, the correct language that wouldn't lead to endless litigation and fights could in fact be adopted in the IP, and Seadrift and its board would be very supportive of that. Thank you very much for your consideration and for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Houlihan. Michael Lawson, Albert Strauss, and Jennifer Thompson. Okay, no Michael Lawson, Albert Strauss, and then Jennifer Thompson and Sandra Cross.
Hi. My name's Albert Strauss. I was raised on a family dairy in Marshall. I converted our dairy and started Strauss Family Creamery as the first certified organic dairy and creamery west of the Mississippi River in 1994. Most farming practices in the coastal agricultural production zone have been category exempt from needing a coastal permit up to now through LCPs. The Coastal Commission staff's proposal to require permits for year-to-year changes in ordinary farming practices is a turning point, making farming less viable in Marin. Farmers need to be able to make farming decisions such as rotating pastures, planting, and rotating crops without additional regulatory regulations. Existing regulatory bodies are already working with farms to protect local natural resources and address climate change. Regional Water Quality Control Board, NRCS, RCD, Marin County staff, organic certifiers, and Fish and Wildlife all help protect and regulate agricultural activities to protect our natural resources. My dairy and 75% of dairies in Marin are certified organic and are subject to national laws that they need to follow. Requiring a coastal Commission permit for ordinary farming activities will be so burdensome, costly, and time-consuming that the process will drive farmers from farming. Attracting new farmers to Marin will be next to impossible. If Coastal Commission permits are required for ordinary farming decisions like changing from pastures to crops on my farm over the next 5 to 10 years, I will not be able to continue farming in Marin. I will not be able to make timely decisions affecting short-term and long-term economic viability for my dairy operation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call up Jennifer Thompson, then Sandra Cross, and then we're going to take a brief break, everyone, for about 10 minutes. So just to give you advance warning and hope. Go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jennifer Thompson. I'm an attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation, the nation's oldest and largest property rights organization defending property rights. I'm here today because we're very concerned about some of the modifications to the implementation plan in the coastal zone. Specifically, we're very concerned about what is effectually a downzoning of hundreds of acres of property in Marin County. The IP gets rid of the 1 unit per 60 acre zoning that has been in place for decades. It also completely outlaws residential use of property. Neither of those are required in order to conform the IP to the LUP. The LUP policies are actually silent as to residential use. Also, policy CAG2, as modified by the Commission last May, still says that it allows up to 3 units per legal lot, not per farm. But regardless of these inconsistencies, this is simply unfair. It's unfair to destroy property owners' development rights in one fell swoop like the proposed amendments do. We know that these development rights have value, and the reason that we know that is because many property owners in the county choose to voluntarily sell their development rights to private land trusts in the form of conservation easements. Those types of voluntary exchanges respect private property rights by compensating landowners, and they also have the outcome of ensuring that property is preserved for agricultural production. That's the way to go, not the Commission's rewriting of these policies, which in one fell swoop destroys these rights and also exposes the county and the Commission to liability for takings lawsuits. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra?
Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning. When we come back from the break, Ed Schmidt will be the first speaker.
Thank you. That was one. Well, I have about 4 major points to make, so I'm going to try and talk a little quickly. We're here about the desalinization prohibition. I know you thought this was taken care of, but we would like some, we're not here to say get rid of it. We're here to say please refine it. Please define it a little better. Please leave some room for some variations for it. We have recently discovered that there is available relatively what we thought was newer technology. You can get container-sized desalinization equipment. It works by reverse osmosis. It's relatively small. You can hide it in shrubbery and landscaping in a small shed. All you would need is a pipe that can be hidden. And to us in Stinson Beach, I'm a member of the Stinson Beach County Water District. I'm also a resident. The problem with Stinson Beach is our water comes from Mount Tam runoff. We don't know how much is there. The creeks are running at a small percentage of what they normally run at. Usually in a normal year, water would almost run out by Sunday night because of all the visitors. We heard the figure 8 million visitors come in. We get inundated, and the demand on our water is great because of the visitors, because of the appreciation for this natural resources and recreational opportunities, which ironically is what this is trying to preserve. So we think that because of this new technology, we have a way to preserve the natural beauty, continue the recreational opportunities, and provide emergency water. It's ironic that we don't know. We have no storage capacity, and we're sitting on the largest body of water on the earth. So it's ironic that you have this absolute prohibition that we cannot use it. So we have come up with, we're just starting to investigate, excuse me, my mouth is dry, a way to use this new technology to meet your demands and your requirements and to provide water. Thank you.
Okay, so we will take a break. We'll shoot for 10 minutes. It will be no longer than 15, certainly. See you. Thank you. We are going to resume our public hearing on the Marin County Local Coastal Program. And let's turn this rodeo into a hearing, please. Thank you. I'm going to invite up Ed Schmidt, followed by Scott Ty, followed by Stacy Carlson. And each of these speakers has 2 minutes.
Good morning, and a special thank you to the staff, the county staff, Jack and Christine and all these other people, because as a member of another agency, another public agency, they are so helpful and they're really prompt in getting back to us. It's a great cooperation that we get from the county staff. And my comments and a couple suggestions are regarding C-PFS-18, and that's the prohibition on desalination. On April 1st, the governor came out with a declaration, a drought declaration, and an ordinance not requiring, but recommending that water agencies look for additional water supplies. And there's several ways that he specifically mentions, he being Governor Brown, specifically mentions alternative water availability to protect groundwaters and also for additional water supplies. Our creek flows are going down. Our sea level is rising. One of the ways that desal in small portions could be used at the district would be to in place a barrier between the existing groundwater, which is going down, and the sea level rise, which is coming up, to have a boundary of desal water between those two areas. It would help protect our water supply. The governor specifically mentions desalination. Sandra Cross, before me, one of my bosses, was talking about some of these newer technologies. I think what could be happening here is the technologies of this science are going faster than the LCP. For example, there's small home units now. I don't know if you're aware of it, but if we're running out of water and people have the money, they can buy a home unit that supplies 150 gallons a day. There's also smaller units that could be used on board ships. A lot of boats in Marin County probably already have them on there. And the district doesn't envision any type of big water supply project with desal. We just got through building a plant. We don't need it. We'd like to have the continued discussion. And to put some reference in here to the fact that it wouldn't be used for new development, but only for replacement of lost drought water. Thank you for your time.
And we'll move to Scott, followed by Stacy, then David Lewis, who has a group presentation.
Thank you, Commissioners. Chairman Kinsey. Fortunately, I'm able to talk after both Sandra and Ed. And I just want to remind you that your staff, at the beginning of this presentation, gave you statistics of 19 public workshops, 9 public hearings with the Planning Commission, and 7 Board of Supervisors public hearings, for a total of 34 public forums, official public forums, plus all the written comments that have been going on. And I'm with Surfrider, as you heard from me yesterday, and one of the issues that I have to take exception to with the Stinson Beach Water District is that it's true what both of them said. There needs to be other alternatives. The governor's recommended it. But desal's not the only alternative. The other thing that's been said from the State Water Board is the classification of gray water or reclaimed water, which doesn't have the adverse environmental impacts that desal has. You set up a water reclamation plant on the coast. It's totally legal. It doesn't violate the Coastal Act or any of the LCPs, but it does provide for reuse of what was once tap water. So I think we really are missing the boat if we don't start looking at all the alternatives. And I just want to say, it's a slippery slope. We're in a drought. We could be in another 5 years of drought. Stinson Beach might petition to have that relaxed. Next thing would be Mirror Beach, Inverness, Point Reyes. Everybody's in the same boat. So let's think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy Carlson, David Lewis. We'll do a group presentation, then Dominic Rossi, who has 2 minutes seated.
Good morning, Commissioners. Stacy Carlson, Marin County Agricultural Commissioner. Our office as well started in 1881 as the Agriculture Department, passed down statutes and authority from the state of California to enforce and regulate agriculture. And Marin County remains in that capacity, as you would know. And in such, we regulate all types of agricultural activities, exclusion, pest detection, pesticides, organic farms, and alike. And today, I look back for my 38 plus years working for the Agriculture Department and 28 as Agricultural Commissioner. I cannot decide how you could define agriculture by limiting practices or activities on a farm. It just unravels me a little bit to accept that. And, you know, we have plenty of regulations in place lined up from top to bottom from all the agencies you heard from and individuals about how we have to remain competitive. We certify over 40,000 acres of organic farms in this county through my office, which is juxtaposition to regulating pesticides at the same time. We also have the Vineyard Erosion Settlement Control Ordinance that was passed. And to state it in a different way, I think I did some math here. We have 0.00003% of the vineyards in California. We have 175 producing acres in the county versus over 200,000 acres in counties around us that have, you know, productive agriculture. We're not a threat to change of use on agriculture. It's topography, it's water, it's not an impact. And I don't see a big rush to change that. Just in summary, intensive use is relative to how one defines that. If you change the soil and you plant something different, doesn't equate to intensive use in my eyes. It's a productive system defined by the term agriculture. And so I thank you for the time. And I've submitted a letter to you as well.
David Lewis will have 6 minutes.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is David Lewis. I'm Director for the University of California Cooperative Extension and the Farm Advisor's Office in Marin County. I'm also the UC Cooperative Extension Watershed Management Advisor. I want to welcome you back to Marin, Commissioners and staff. I think it was about this time last year we were out in Inverness, and I just want to emphasize for you that what you experienced then, or maybe on the 2013 tour when you came for the agricultural workshop, you'd experience today. A very open and connected working landscape. And I really want to emphasize that that is not by accident. 10 years prior to the Coastal Act and to the Coastal Commission forming, Marin, the community, made very purposeful decisions to protect the land against development. We are fortunate to have a few in the audience that know about that experience. But if you haven't had the chance, I really recommend you read Farming on the Edge. It tells the story of the intense debate and the effort to partner across agriculture and environmental interests to come to this agreement, to come to this partnership, preserving the land for working landscapes and our farms. Having said that, I'd like you to continue to try to entertain how this LCP, its LUP and its implementation plan, can align with the other agencies that are regulating both land use and protecting the environment going forward, and not duplicate efforts in a siloed state resource agency. There's too many of those already, and there's lots of duplication. I have two examples. The first is the recently passed Groundwater Management Act, and you have a fact sheet. I brought this for you today. I want you to understand, and you probably know in your own jurisdictions where you come from in your own areas, this is rolling out currently. So there will be groundwater regulation and monitoring going forward from the Department of Water Resources. The other example, we are currently are entertaining an open review of the San Francisco Regional Water Quality Control Board's animal feeding operation general waste discharge order. This is the renewal of regulation to protect surface waters from dairy manure. A long-standing regulation and now up for renewal. By the way, its deadline was scheduled, the comments for today. Fortunately, that agency agreed to give us 2 more weeks because they knew this was happening. I'm going to try to speed up a little, but there are a couple quick things just to say that have already been said. The definition of ongoing ag really needs to be revised. I don't know how else to tell you. A 10-year time frame, as proposed in the draft, does not allow for the longer cycles of production and the ability to adapt to needed changes in the local economy and rules and regulations of farming. One recent example results from the transition of dairies to organic, which presently are more than 75% of the dairies are organic. In being organic, you have to be pasture-based. You have to get your feed and your forage from your pastures. So to do this, dairymen have adapted by increasing their hay production. They've gone back into producing hay on fields that they haven't farmed for 30 years. You've already heard from new farmers that haven't farmed, that are new to farming and are finding new acreage, and they're farming on lands that haven't been producing vegetables and fruits for more than 10 years. So those examples really highlight why both the definitions of ongoing and existing ag, as well as the requirements around the categorical exclusion for confirming it and documenting it need revision as well in this implementation plan. I ask you also to rise above the hyperbole and doomsday that industrial agriculture will come to Marin if this IP is passed. Marin's 250 farms and ranches average about 500 acres each, and they're 90% small and medium farms. That means they earn less than $100,000 a year as an operation. Do you know what the cost of living is in Marin for a family of 4? $82,000. So the proposals in the IP that are being moved forward for retail sales and processing are really designed to help these farms move above that cost of living and to really support the local economy. So again, think about those changes and why those are being entertained now and relevant to processing and retail sales. There are needs to look at how, because these are farmstead and artisan operations, supporting up to 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 farms, that retail sales and processing should include products from more than just one farm. 2 examples include a cheese where you'd mix cow and sheep milk to make a nice cheese. Another example would be where 3 egg producers, pasture-based egg producers, might want to come together and just have 1 retail sale facility, not 3. So there's lots of reasons why you want to look beyond just the single producer's product. I'll actually end on a procedural note in a way to say maybe continuation is needed. This is the 780 pages we got on April 3rd at 3:30 in the afternoon, plus the 15 pages we got yesterday at 3:30 again in the afternoon. I think by any estimation, that's a very tight time window to review and engage stakeholders and staff, to understand issues and intent, find agreement, and make potential revisions to language. Thank you.
Thank you. Sydney Baskin, Steve Mart, and Phyllis Faber. Oh, had I called Dominic? Yes, excuse me. I got my cards mixed up a little bit, please.
Thank you. I believe I have 2 minutes from
Yes.
Judy Teichman as well.
Judy Teichman.
Thank you. Dominic Grossi, I'm a rancher here in Marin County. When this process started about 8 years ago, primarily with meetings with Jack Leibster, Brian Crawford in their office, we have since logged thousands and thousands of hours, hundreds of meetings, and we created a document, I say we, I primarily mean Jack and his staff, that fits Marin County. I bring this up because the California Public Resources Code, section 30500C, clearly states that the content of an LCP shall be determined by local government, and we have done that. Our local government approved all of the hard work and the community involvement that's taken place here in Marin County. And now we have, as David just showed, a 700-plus page document with hundreds and hundreds of changes in it to what our county has approved. This is no longer the document that we approved or that we feel as a county fits for our county. I mean, I know we've asked for more time, and I think that would be a very prudent thing to do. But if you wanted to approve something today, I would approve what the county submitted to you and take the 780 pages that David just showed you and throw it away. The other thing to make very clear, the Coastal Act makes it very clear that agriculture is a priority, and there is a reason for that. Go look through these hills all over the state, but especially here in Marin. People think Marin County is a beautiful place to stay, and I agree. You come up and you see it. It's protected from mass development, not because of environmentalists and not because of overregulation, but because ranchers for the past 150 plus years in this county have protected it, passed it on to their children, and taught them to protect it as well, and we want to continue that. So please listen to the ranchers as they continue to bring these issues up to you. I'll only touch on a few things because I have a couple more minutes. One of the things has to do with the grading issue and the 150 yards. Our county allowed up to 150 yards of gravel or rock or dirt to be moved. Well, the staff report removes that. So now if you have a small problem on a road, we can't fix it without a development permit. And what can happen while we're waiting, month, 2 months, maybe 6 months for that permit to get passed? You could have rainstorms, which would be nice, but that can cause a small hole in a road to become a massive problem, and now it takes thousands of yards. You're encouraging erosion by eliminating 150 yards. It's a small amount that could be used to fix roads. The other thing I found personally offensive is that tours, simple tours that so many farmers give on their ranches year in and year out, will now not be allowed unless you're a nonprofit organization. Well, I'm a farmer, therefore I work for profit. But the tours we give on our ranches are totally free. My mother, between 1975 and 85, gave tours to every second grader that came through the town of Novato. We never charged them a penny, but all of them got to see where milk comes from, let little calves suck on their fingers. So these are the types of changes. I have no idea where they came from staff here, but they're ridiculous. And one last point in my final minute, we talked about the merging of the contiguous parcels. And our county has said they're okay if it's on contiguous ground, you can merge them. I still think that could even become a problem because now you're encouraging ranchers to take their 4 parcels, which really account for one farm, and separate them out and put them in each of their children or grandchildren's name because they want to protect the idea that they can have multiple generations over the years. If they're only allowed the one intergenerational house and the 2 extra intergenerationals if they go through the permitting process, on a large farm, if you've got a lot of kids that want to come back to the ranch, they wouldn't be able to do it. So they're going to take their parcels and separate them out if they have 4 or 5 legal parcels. It almost encourages that. You know, we want to keep our ranches whole, and that's why we have the A60 zoning within it. It would allow them to build the extra houses where they need to without merging all of their parcels that are contiguous or otherwise. We shouldn't be forced into that merger. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now, Sydney Baskin, then Steve Mart, then Phyllis Faber.
My name is Sydney Baskin. I'm here speaking on behalf of the excuse me, West Marin Sonoma Coastal Advocates. I want to read a letter that we sent in. Do I get more time speaking for our
No, 2
organization?
minutes unless
Okay.
you have other speakers.
The West Marin Sonoma Coastal Advocates, WSMSCA, appreciates this opportunity to comment on the Marin County Local Coastal Program Amendment as presented to the California Coastal Commission on May 15th, 2014. We want to begin by thanking the Marin County Community Development Agency LCP team, captained by Jack Leapster, and the CCC staff who have devoted countless hours working with the county staff. The decision to disallow WEX wind energy conversion systems in Marin's coastal zone is commendable, ensures that the irreplaceable natural resources, agricultural viewsheds, open spaces, and recreational opportunities are preserved for the enjoyment of 17 million annual visitors who contribute to our economy. Additionally, the exclusion of WEX from Marin's coastal zone supports the March 12, 2015 federal final rule governing the expanded Gulf of the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. The current regulations prohibit alternative energy installations. We are encouraged by the forward-looking decisions made by the Marin County Board of Supervisors and the CCC members. Respectfully, WMSCA. I do have one concern. The Marin County Coastal Program Amendment addressing wind energy systems in the coastal zone. Section 22.32.180. Wind energy conversion systems, WEX, non-coastal. Including WEX in the tables from the countywide plan, WEX ordinance renders the LCP internally inconsistent. This section addresses permit requirements for WEX in the non-coastal zones. Can I just finish this?
Finish that sentence.
We are requesting all references to WEX be struck from the tables in 22.32.180 as the LCP clearly states. Wind energy conversion systems are not allowed in the coastal zone. The inclusion of these tables addressing WEX in the non-coastal zones are confusing and inconsistent with the LCPA statement.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up at this
Okay,
point.
this is it. I'm at the end.
We understand. No, you are at the end. Thank you. Steve Mart, please. Thank you.
Almost made it.
Hi, I'm Steve Mart. I can get Mike Lawson's 2 minutes. It's been donated to me because he wasn't able to stay.
No, that's okay, Steve. I think you're going to have to go with 2. We have rules. Got to be in the room. Thanks
All
very
right,
much.
No problem. Anyway, real quickly, in what's being proposed right now is a little bit ironic to me. I took over a turkey ranch in West Marin. I'm born and raised in Sonoma County. My heritage goes back to the 20s in farming, but in this group, I'm a relative newcomer. I've been there for 10 years. If this goes through, I don't know, I'm raising chickens on a turkey ranch. I don't know if that would have been allowed. And I'm also leasing out part of it to a broiler operation. I don't know if that would have been allowed. So this whole thing of what farmers have to do to be viable should be up to farmers. And I'm going to keep that really clear on that it should be an economic decision that farmers make. And then another thing that I want to talk about is that I have 4 boys. And what's really bothering me about the clustering of buildings on contiguous parcels, one of the larger challenges that I have is to have my boys be interested in farming. I'm sure you're all aware that less than 2% of the people feeding America are involved in agriculture now. And it's getting increasingly challenging to get kids to come back to the farm. And odds are, with that low amount of people that are in farming, it's really going to be challenging if their spouse is going to be from a farming family also. And while it's acceptable that a non-farm family gets person marries into one of my boys, it's definitely hard to convince them that not only they got to move from the farm, move from town out to the farm, and guess what? Because the other kids are already there, they only get 800 square feet house and 2 bedrooms. And by the way, it's going to be right next to their in-laws, even though you have places on the ranch to put it. So I just want to leave you one quick thought that a famous economist wrote about, Frederick Hayek, I think I spelled the name right, and he said that liberty cannot exist under a government that does not respect private property. When you go through this process, please remember that. Thank you.
Thank you. Phyllis Faber, followed by Crawford Cooley, and then John Sharp.
Okay, my name is Phyllis Faber. I'm a former coastal commissioner, and I'm also the co-founder of the Marin Agricultural Land Trust. MALT, which is what we call the land trust, was indirectly formed or processed by this commission. not this one, but the former one. In the mid-'70s, agriculture was failing big time in Marin. The agriculture was entirely missing from East Marin, and there were for sale signs all the way up to Mollis Bay, and agriculture was regarded to be gone. The kids were all leaving the farms, and the day of ag was over. Curiously, the LCP formation was going to probably require Marin County to downzone from A60, which had been traumatic in creating, to 120 or maybe 240. And this was a horrifying notion to the supervisors, who felt that each one of them would be recalled if they imposed 120 zoning on this county. So, the thought of a land trust was whispered around, and they said, well, maybe it would work. And in fact, that is what they did, rather than have further downzoning. MALT has changed Marin County without any question. We are now almost up to 50% of all the ag land in Marin County with easements in perpetuity. So farming has changed. The kids have come back to the farms. It's a very different scene in this county. What I want to encourage you to do is to pay attention to the people that spoke to you today, to some of the letters that you've received, because ag is not an easy industry. Ag is seriously threatened in this county today. I'll just finish by saying the Point Reyes National Seashore is planning to get rid of 24% of Marin's agriculture. That's huge, and they are well on their way. So anyway, help us out and listen to the presentations today.
Crawford Cooley, John Sharp, and Jeffrey Westman.
Good morning, I'm Crawford Cooley, and I am the trustee of land that's been on our family since 1850 in Marin County. The word I would like to leave with you is flexibility. And almost everything I've heard today tends to limit flexibility. I give you an example. In 1850, dairy was not a problem. It wasn't hardly a product in Marin County, but tallow was. So our family, making tallow, which was the only way to make money at the time, totally clear-cut Mount Burdell for the lumber, for the wood it needed to create the fires to create tallow. The point of the story is that I wouldn't suggest that that could happen today, but don't allow such lack of flexibility that farming is put in jeopardy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, John, and then Jeffrey, and then Jameson Watts.
Good morning, Chair Kinsey and members of the Commission. I am here on behalf of Sierra Club. I would like to focus on a couple of specific items that are set forth in your staff report as originally published on March 3rd or made available on March 3rd. And then the addendum to that staff report that was became available yesterday. At page 2 of the original staff report, the first full paragraph describes the process by which the 600 some odd pages of material comes to you today. There's a reference to 477 pages of soft submittal. I don't know what that is. I've read that paragraph about 10 times. I can't understand the process, so I'd hope that at this hearing or at a subsequent hearing, which it sounds like will occur, there could be some elaboration about how that process worked, what the documentation was that went into creation of the soft submittal, and that could be revealed publicly. Secondly, looking at today's addendum, there is reference to a couple of things that I wanted to address. One is at page 1, there's a quote, "County staff has expressed concern about the IP's agricultural dwelling provisions." Sierra Club has concern as well about those provisions. County staff tells you in a nutshell that you shouldn't be concerned because the require for voluntary merger is a disincentive to people seeking to further subdivide properties. I don't see any methodology, and I submit to you that the assumptions relied upon in that section of your staff report do not rise to any evidentiary standard. And finally, in my 12 seconds, I will say there's reference to public hearing requirements. This is at page 3 of yesterday's staff report. And that because there is a right of appeal from, if you just let me finish the sentence, from the planning director's action on a development plan, that satisfies the public participation requirements of the Coastal Act, and I submit that that is not the case. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeffrey Westman, Cayman Ackerman, followed by Richard Cohn.
Got Jameson after me.
Jameson's behind, yeah.
Yes. I'm Jeffrey Westman, I'm Executive Director of Marin Organic. My comments today, I'm going to divorce myself of the organic certification and speak about the farmers and ranchers and organizations in Marin County as a whole, and say that, in my estimation, they're about the best stewards of the land to be found on the earth. I've spent a lot of my time in my adult life working in agriculture in Europe, primarily Northern Europe, but also in Spain and France and a little bit in Italy. And I have to say that my experience has always been with European farmers and ranchers and food producers that they look to Marin County as an example. They see it as a world-class standard. And I want to encourage you to pay close attention to all the farmers and ranchers that have shown up here, and food producers for that matter, and other organizations like ours, because they represent the standard that many farmers and ranchers wish they could have in their regions and other parts of the world. Additionally, a point that's been brought up on multiple occasions is the next generation. We are seeing our farmers and ranchers, not just in this county, but all over the country, aging and retiring and not having the next generation come in and take over. Yet there are a large group of very enthusiastic, hardworking, dedicated agrarians willing to step in and feed the people who are hungry. And to the best of my knowledge, everybody in this room, everybody in this county wants at least a couple free meals every day, and somebody's got to feed them. And we should be really proud of the fact that not only do we feed this county very well, with very high standards, great environmental stewardship, and delicious flavors, but we feed a big part of the Bay Area. This is not something to be ignored. And if we do ignore it and we make it too difficult, they're going to go to Sonoma County. There's thousands of young farmers up there working because they feel like it's easier, and Marin County's made it difficult for them. Let's not make it more difficult. Thank you.
Thank you. Cayman, Richard Cohn, and then John Taylor. Are these folks that were associated with?
I'm not sure. I thought I was after Jeffrey Westman.
You thought you were after?
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, I have you down as 912, and I have a handful of folks coming just before you.
Okay.
That's fine. Just working the time clock here. So Cayman, Richard, and then John.
Hi, my name is Cayman Ackerman, and I'm farming about 5 acres of vegetables in West Marin. Mostly I'm here to just address the change of use thing. I started with, really like about $4,000 to start the farm and a wrench. And so if I was, to have a permit in order to, start putting vegetables onto a pasture, I totally wouldn't have been able to do it. Furthermore, I right now lease from 2 different landowners, and we actually, on one of them, I share water with the cattle, and we have a reservoir, and I actually got it so that we could put, in order to certify those acres organic, put a fence around it and get the cattle out of it and certify it organic. And we share the water. Me and the rancher, we talk all the time. And, we say, well, what do you think about the water? Yeah, it's getting pretty low. Maybe some rain's coming. So my point being that as farmers, we're not only producers of agricultural goods, but of course, we're managers of an agroecological system, ecological system. And so just having that trust that, yeah, we're concerned about water. We're concerned about runoff. We're concerned about riparian zones. We're concerned about all that stuff. And just kind of, we're working it out. And again, it's a marginal existence. So more permitting and stuff like that makes it very difficult. So I appreciate the effort that all y'all put into attention of our land here, and that's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Richard, followed by John, and then Lori Kyle.
Well, my name is Richard Cohn. I'm a resident of Muir Beach. I'd like to speak to 2270-180, potential takings evaluation. This provision would enable the Community Development Agency to override provisions in the LCP in order to avoid a taking claim. It's a ill-considered and illegal provision. In Hensler versus City of Glendale, the California Supreme Court said, quote, "An administrative agency is not competent to decide whether its own action constitutes a taking." In a nutshell, the proper role of the agency, the CDA, is to apply the terms of the LCP. Taking issues are exclusively in the realm of the courts, and there are elaborate procedures for how takings claims can be raised. This provision, if you approved it, would completely undermine this process and would conflict with decisions of the Court of Appeals and the California Supreme Court. The staff has not responded to the legal issues that I've raised involving the case law. They have made a couple of arguments, and I just have time to deal with two of them. One is they claim that Section 30010 of the Coastal Act authorizes this procedure of trying to avoid takings claims. That position was rejected in Sierra Club versus California Coastal Commission, and since they were the defendant in the case, they can hardly be unaware of that. The court held that that provision was put in there to avoid a facial challenge to the act. The second point is the understandable concern that they have that they're trying to shield themselves from having to pay compensation. The Supreme Court in the Hensler case dealt with that. If an applicant brings a administrative mandamus case, at the end of that hearing, the county has an opportunity to rescind or amend the regulation or find a way to deal with it to avoid paying compensation. I would ask you to read the letter that I submitted today, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, John, followed by Lori. And then Amy Trainer.
Hello, my name is John Taylor from the Bivalve Dairy in Point Reyes. I want to go back to about 10 years ago when my wife and I had the opportunity to come back to her family's ranch to make a big change. Conventional dairying was not viable any longer, and we saw a great market change opportunity to go organic. So we made a big life change. We came back to the ranch to raise our kids. Sometimes gets emotional to me because there are 7 generations of dairy families in California, 5 here in West Marin. And the reason why we were able to do it, because we transitioned to organic, because of the practices, approved practices through NRCS, RCD, University Cooperative Extension, to take our ranch back to the original practices that were being done, grazing animals on grass, raising silage, doing hay. And if we were to have to go get a coastal permit to do that process, we would not be in business today because we continue those practices. Even throughout the drought, we are changing our crops. We're managing our dairy differently because of what's coming at us environmentally from effects of a drought. Could be too much rain, not enough rain. So the ability for us to have the flexibility to make those changes is very important for the viability of our dairy. So thank you.
Thank you. Lori Kyle, and you'll have 4 minutes. 2 speakers.
Yes, thank you. I'll be followed by George Clyde. Good morning, Chair Kinsey and Commission. My name is Lori Kyle, and I'm president of the East Shore Planning Group. The East Shore Planning Group is a California nonprofit corporation formed in 1984 and has a membership of about 90 owners, tenants, and operators of residential, commercial, and agricultural properties. in the unincorporated area of Marin County all along the east shore of Tomales Bay. ESPG is the primary local organization involved with development issues in this area, and we've been active in the formulation of the amendments to the LCP since the process began. Last May, members of the Commission enjoyed a social evening at Hog Island Oyster Company. Hog Island is about halfway along the east shore of Tomales Bay. I'm sure those of you who were able to attend can appreciate why we so love and appreciate this gorgeous stretch of coast and why we want to protect it from the over-commercialization of the sort that you see in Napa and in the wine country. We strongly support agriculture in our area, and we agree with the CDA that there should be reasonable opportunities for local farmers and ranchers to sell their products to the public on their ranches. This is possible now with a use permit and the full county process, with a possible appeal to the Coastal Commission. We agree that this process should be relaxed. And we support the county's position in its April 13th letter, which would allow coastal permits for retail operations less than 500 square feet, where the owners and operators sell his or her own products. And we agree that the local operator should also be able to sell products from his or her other operations in Marin and Sonoma County, collectively known as the farm shed. However, this needs to be limited exception to the normal permitting requirements and should not apply to larger facilities, nor should it apply to farm stands which sell products from other producers. I will close now. I have more to say, but I will cede the floor to George Clyde.
Good morning, Chair Kinsey and Commissioners. I'm George Clyde. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd like to speak with respect to the county's provisions, their recommendations. It's the next to last page of the blue sheet you have. We agree with these recommendations wholeheartedly. May I have the first slide, please? It has been said that the limitation of 500 square feet I'll organize this. 500 square feet for principally permitted use effectively reduces the potential impact of a farm stand. The slide that you hopefully will see will show that that's not true. That's a farm stand. It's not under the APZ regime, but it has a capacity of 800 people with, there you are, hundreds of cars. And the rest of the space is picnic tables, parking, and processing facilities. That is just to show you why we're concerned about these smaller farms. In addition, that particular farm imports much of its product, its shellfish that it sells at retail. That's allowed it to grow exponentially, and that's another reason why we're concerned about allowing, as a principal permitted use, a farm stand which allows which sells products from other persons. The operator's products from Marin or Sonoma County is fine, but other products by other operators should be subject to the full regulatory thing. Lastly, I'll show you another farm stand. Next slide, please. Next. This is a farm stand in Marin County under the same regime, the countywide plan that was the genesis for this particular provision of the LCP, and that's what we support. This is the kind of farm stand that is under those regulations, and we would support strongly. Thank you so much.
Okay, Amy Traynor, followed by Jamison Watts, and those are the final speaker cards that we have at this point. Now, Ms. Traynor, 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 12 minutes.
Great, thank you, Chair Kinsey. Members of the Commission, Amy Traynor, the Director of the West Marin Environmental Action Committee. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. First, I want to say a really big thank you to the Coastal Commission staff. I think they've done an outstanding job of filling in the many areas that were incomplete in the implementation plan. As you've heard, and EAC certainly agrees, West Marin is a special place, and it didn't happen by accident. We have internationally significant bird habitat, internationally significant wetlands in Tomales Bay. We're part of the Gulf of the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. We have the only West Coast National Park, Point Reyes National Seashore. We have marine protected areas and numerous areas of special biological significance. So this is the premise that has informed EAC's comments throughout this process. And I do think that environmentalists were a very important piece in keeping West Marin wild. We were instrumental in stopping a 1960 county proposal to turn Highway 1, which is a very scenic highway, into a 4-lane freeway that would have resulted in numerous towns and subdivisions along our bay. So we definitely see ourselves as a partner in this process to keep West Marin agriculture and our amazing wildlands wild. I'd like to reiterate that we believe our LCP administration, it is certainly largely local, but this part of the process is about, the state administration. You all are entrusted with ensuring that the Coastal Act standards are met through this document. So I want to turn now to all the agricultural piece. EAC definitely appreciates the unique agricultural history of West Marin. I mean, it really is unlike any other place. And I have to say, in all the meetings that we've attended with the agricultural community and the meetings that I've had personally with Jeff Stump, the Director of Conservation for the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, it's been a very informative process. And we've really taken to heart all the learning that we've done, and I think that is reflected in our comments. My friends in the agricultural community, thankfully, good news, tell me that animal agriculture is at an all-time high. That they say 9-month-old steers that were selling for $600 5 years ago are now selling for $1,500. And because all of our dairies are now organic, they're real leaders in that way, they're making over 2 times what a conventional dairy would make. So we're really thankful to have that leadership in our agricultural community. So with that, I guess I would just say I would reject any even implication that EAC is insensitive or would propose policies that would harm ongoing agricultural activity. I think when you look at our dozens of pages of technical analysis that we've submitted throughout this process, and certainly the past 6 months, you see that that is just not the case. I don't consider the Coastal Commission's modifications to be overbroad. I believe that the Coastal Commission staff, Dr. Lester and Dan and Kevin and Nancy and Shannon, have spent just an unbelievable amount of time and energy really listening to the agricultural community and really trying to be sensitive to their needs. We absolutely support the flexibility that is built into this implementation plan. We believe it provides ongoing ag to continue largely with no permits. We've always said that if you're a row cropper like Peter Martinelli and you're going from broccoli to strawberries to peas, of course, we would never, ever say that that would require a permit. That doesn't make any sense. But the fact is that agriculture can have impacts at times. We're surrounded by all these sensitive habitats. Tomales Bay is an impaired water body under Section 303D of the Clean Water Act for sediment, for nutrients. So we're saying that where there are, in instances where there are going to be impacts, the only way that you can mitigate those is going through some kind of permit process. So we don't support this blanket exemption for all ag. We think that in many cases, no permit is going to be required. And where a permit is going to be triggered, you're going to get probably a waiver, probably a de minimis permit. It's very seldom that you're going to have a full-blown coastal development permit. So I think, assuming that this is going to continue, which sounds where we're headed, I would like to see us maybe focus on those thresholds rather than saying we have this blanket exemption. This isn't about not trusting the farmers. It's just about the reality that there can be impacts. But trying to find that sweet spot where we can support, like the owner of the tabletop farm. I completely appreciate where he and the other young farmers are coming from, and I think it's awesome that we have this new generation coming in. But while we maintain that flexibility, we also have to understand that there can be impacts, whether cumulatively or individually. And so if we maybe focus on a kind of trigger, performance standard, and maybe outline it a little more so that we're really clear that here's this 90% of the time where you're not going to even need a permit. But here's this maybe 10 to 15% of the time where you might need a waiver just so that we can make sure that there aren't any, we can mitigate, whatever impacts there might be, or that we can mitigate if there's a de minimis waiver. That's the approach that EAC is taking. And we believe that that combined with a plethora of streamlining techniques that the Coastal Commission staff has worked so hard to incorporate into this process, that we could get where we want to go. So again, we don't support the county's proposal to blur together all ongoing agriculture with new development. We want a performance standard. We do think that there are going to be instances, and admittedly those might be very rare, when new agriculture rises to the level of development that needs a coastal development permit. But we don't think that we should just have this blanket exception, especially given all of the streamlining techniques that have been built in. So I'd like to address the issue of farmhouses. We disagree with the interpretation that limiting one farmhouse to each farm will affect a merger of legal lots. Our certified LCP for over 30 years has allowed one farmhouse for all contiguous parcels under common ownership. We don't believe that anything has really changed in the land use plan that you all approved last May. So in over 30 years, there's been no impetus to sell off legal lots so that people could have more than one farmhouse. In fact, under what's proposed, you still get your farmhouse, but we're actually agreeing that there are these new development rights. You're getting 2 intergenerational houses, and you're getting 1 intergenerational house as a principal permitted use. And I think that's largely because a lot of the lot size, the average lot size in this ag production zone is 120 acres. So people already have that density. And then where they want to get a second intergenerational house, it's a conditional permit because they need to tap into their density on another legal lot that they have. And we think that makes sense. And when that happens, you need to have some kind of restriction so you know that the density from that second lot, which requires 60 acres for that second intergenerational house, has been used. So we've agreed with that approach, and we don't have any problem with it. There's a ranch that Malt bought, the Borello Ranch. It's now called the Millerton Creek Ranch, and it was made up of 3 legal lots. And EAC wrote a strong letter of support for that sale. And technically, all those legal lots were up for sale individually. So if they had been sold individually, if Malt hadn't come in and saved the day, like thankfully Malt always seems to be able to do, you could have had, technically, you could have had 1 farmhouse, and then eventually, because each of those lots were about 300 acres, a couple of intergenerational houses. So you could have ended up with 9 new houses, whereas now, because they will effectively, merge them, it will be much less. But I don't think, as far as conservation easement rights go, the existing framework where you have 1 farmhouse allowed for all contiguous lots under common ownership has still allowed Malt to purchase development rights. And so we don't believe that anything has changed under the land use plan, that Malt is still able to purchase. There are no development rights that are extinguished in this case. Because believe me, I've been very clear. I'm grateful for Malt. I ran a land trust in rural Colorado before moving to California. I want Malt to continue to buy up the development rights in the coastal zone. It's to everybody's benefit. There's no question to us. So we support that, and we just disagree with the interpretation. A couple of closing issues. On visual resource protection, we do still strongly believe that we need objective standards to implement the land use policy. We think something more than just referring back to the policy is needed here. We've suggested language that actually has been taken from other certified LCPs that would provide some objective standards. And so we would respectfully ask that as this process kind of goes back to negotiation, that the Coastal Commission staff could reconsider that. EAC has been pretty adamant in the need to retain a lot of the background information that's in our certified LCP. It really informs the history of agriculture in West Marin and the need for these large family farms. And it also gets into outlining all of these very sensitive biological areas that are so important for migrating birds and our marine mammals and all the things that we love in West Marin. So the county chose not to update this information, and that's okay. I think some of it, much of it, is actually still applicable. And so, we're urging that these findings that are important in a lot of cases, that they be carried forward. And finally, I would just close with, the public process under Coastal Act Section 300006, maybe that was one too many zeros, says that the legislature finds and declares that the public has a right to fully participate in decisions affecting coastal planning, conservation, and development, and that continuing planning and implementation of programs for coastal conservation and development should include the widest opportunity for public participation. So we believe that the widest opportunity for public participation would be carrying forward the opportunity to have public hearings in every instance. I mean, as it's set up now, it puts the burden on EAC, Marin Conservation League, the public to file appeals before we have a public hearing, rather than just saying we're going to do a staff report and we're going to have a public hearing. Every time EA submits comments, they're usually technical and legal and very useful. And we want to continue to be a part of this. We've made very clear to the agricultural community, this is not about filing appeals and stopping any development proposals. This is about, hey, we're working together. We all have a stake in this. We all really care. And we just want to have a seat at the table and not have to file an appeal. We want it to be a more proactive process, and we think that would support this Coastal Act section, guaranteeing the widest opportunity for public participation. So again, thank you to everybody involved. We look forward to staying engaged and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. Thanks.
Thank you. And Jameson Watts.
Thank you, Chairman Kinsey, and good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jameson Watts. I'm the Executive Director of the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, also known as MALT. Before I get going, I want to thank the County of Marin staff and the Commission staff for all your hard work. Everybody understands and appreciates all the work that's gone into this, and I hope we can get something accomplished, maybe not today, but soon.
I just want to mention that a number of people had ceded time to you. You'll have 12 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, we submitted a packet to all of you, also there'll be slides for the audience. MALT was born through a partnership between the conservation and agricultural community. We were the first and continue to be the most successful local agricultural land trust in the country. We have spent the last 35 years working with the County of Marin, our agricultural partners, our farming families, and our funding partners to help implement the Coastal Act in Marin County. MALT currently holds, monitors, and enforces agricultural conservation easements on 74 family farms and ranches totaling over 47,000 acres countywide. That's almost half of all the privately owned farmland in the county. Important to this discussion, we hold agricultural conservation easements on 38 family farms in the coastal zone, constituting about 15,000 acres. In addition, we are currently working to acquire easements on 8 more family farms and ranches in the coastal zone from willing sellers, protecting an additional 5,300 acres. When you add those two together, it's about 20,000 acres. That's approximately 2/3 of all the agricultural land, all the privately owned agricultural land in the coastal zone, which is significant. Some of the tools we've developed to protect Marin's family farms and coastal resources. Home size restrictions. MALT easements typically restrict the size of principal residences to 3,000 square feet. We have creek conservation areas. We map and protect creeks and wetlands and require adaptive management plans be written by third-party resource professionals, which are approved by MALT. The plans are approved by MALT. These plans prescribe best management practices and are updated regularly to reflect changing circumstances. Restricted areas. We also use restricted areas in our easements to protect steep slopes and environmentally sensitive areas from activities that threaten soil and water quality. Within these areas, we prohibit ground disturbing activities. The map is the Borello Ranch, now called Millerton Creek Ranch, which Amy Traynor previously referenced. You can see the 3 legal lots. The areas buffered in red are our creek conservation areas. And you'll also see black and white lines. Those delineate existing fencing and proposed fencing. Affirmative agricultural use covenants. Since 2011, MALT has required that our easement-protected lands stay in productive agricultural use. In 2014, we went a step further, implementing a program to amend our older easements to include both our affirmative agricultural use covenants and creek conservation areas. This is done in cooperation with our landowners on a voluntary basis and for compensation. And we are the only land trust in the nation to have a comprehensive program like this. The affirmative agricultural use provisions require an agricultural management plan. These plans are developed by a third-party certified rangeland manager and must be approved by MALT. They are also periodically updated to reflect changing conditions. The purpose of these plans is to establish an agricultural baseline of an operation so that MALT can monitor and enforce the affirmative agricultural use provision. So before I get into our concerns with some of the staff recommendations, I want to take a moment to recognize your efforts, you and your staff's efforts in recognizing your efforts to protect and enhance Marin's family farms and use the family farm as, quote, the metric by which the Coastal Act's agricultural protection standards would be based. This is especially evident in your inclusion of intergenerational housing. So we appreciate that. Thank you for that. Having said that, we believe that together with Marin County and other agricultural support organizations, MALT and Marin's family farmers have done a remarkable job of protecting the agricultural land in the coastal zone. To disrupt this system that is currently in place and has been in place since the early 80s would, I think, disrupt and undermine our collective efforts. We've done a remarkable job. It's working. I guess the message here is that it is working. We have been successful in both promoting a thriving agricultural community as far as productivity and protecting coastal resources. It's working. Therefore, this LCP update should better focus on how to support environmentally sustainable agriculture that's economically viable, i.e. not just protecting the land, but also protecting the farmer. Therefore, we request the following, and when you go back to the drawing board here, that you continue to support on-farm retail sales of products from the local food shed. 2, we have serious concerns about staff's proposal for treating lots in common ownership. This has been discussed a little bit throughout the comment period here. Treating all parcels under common ownership as qualified for only one farmhouse and 2 associated intergenerational units, regardless of whether they are separate certificated legal parcels, is an effective merger of the property and would substantially devalue that property. This will dramatically reduce the value of not only the property, but also a proposed conservation easement, which directly affects MALT and the work we've been doing for the last 35 years. This is problematic because landowners come to us when they are in need. They need our help to save the family farm and remain in farming. The sale of a conservation easement by a family to MALT generates the funds necessary to pay crushing estate taxes, consolidate ownership, and prevent the sale of a ranch. Merging contiguous parcels under common ownership would effectively marginalize MALT's role in the coastal zone. And if we could go back a couple slides to the Borrello Ranch, I would just like to give you an example of that. Last October, as Amy mentioned, MALT, with a loan from the Packard Foundation, purchased the Borrello Ranch, one of the most at-risk properties in the coastal zone, which is comprised of 3 legal lots, as you can see there. Our intention is to sell the ranch subject to an agricultural conservation easement. Should this LCP update be adopted before we are scheduled to complete the transaction in 2018, MALT is likely to be significantly impacted financially as 3 separately certificated parcels will effectively be merged. So that everybody understands, the loan we took out from the Packard Foundation was for the full development value of 3 legal lots. And so the agricultural easement money that we have to raise from our funders is related to that value. Conservation easement value is related to development value. So if we decrease the development value of this property with this in effect merger, the value of that conservation easement will decrease as well, And the money that we were planning on raising towards the conservation easement will be significantly less, and Malt will be left holding the bag. There's another property, some of these properties I mentioned that we're currently working to protect in the coastal zone. It's the same situation. There's legal lots involved. If this change were to be incorporated, the landowners might likely back out because it just doesn't make sense to them financially. So the A60 zoning, the development value, and the subsequent conservation easement value is a very carefully crafted formula. It's a system that's worked since 1980. And again, I just urge the commission to really look at this more closely. The system is working. Again. Okay, most importantly, perhaps, is this notion that changes in agricultural use should require a coastal development permit. This will be devastating to many family farmers in Marin who are seeking to innovate or to adapt to changes in agriculture due to climate change or changing markets. That's what farming is. You have to be able to adapt to changing conditions. And we need to empower and support our farmers and ranchers in doing that, not regulate them. There's, as was previously mentioned, there are probably at least a dozen regulatory agencies that regulate agriculture. We don't need another layer of regulation. One of the reasons Malt has been so successful in our efforts to protect both agriculture and natural resources in the coastal zone is that we put our efforts into resource protection where it matters most: the streams, wetlands, and other significant natural areas. Outside of these areas, our flexible approach to agricultural use has allowed farming and families to continue thriving and changing and adapting in the coastal zone. We urge you to reject this proposal of requiring a coastal development permit for change in agricultural use. I would like to close with a quote from Aldo Leopold. He's one of the greatest conservationists in American history. He said, "When land does well for its owner, and the owner does well by his land, when both end up better by reason of their partnership, we have conservation." So conservation then is a function of partnership between people and the land. And no one is closer to the land than the farmer and the rancher today. So I urge you to consider that when you work with your staff to make any more changes and what the future of this process holds. Remember that conservation is a function of partnership between people and the land. We have to make it work for the people on the land, and that is the farmer and the rancher. Thank you.
That completes the public comment, public hearing portion. We'll bring back, actually doesn't complete the public hearing, we'll bring back the county if you have up to 5 minutes for any additional comments you wish to make, and then we'll take up any thoughts the staff would have.
Thank you, Chair Kinsey. Brian Crawford with the County of Marin. Well, much of the testimony you heard this afternoon is either consistent with some of the concerns that we raised or at least closely related to that. So certainly not going to rebut that. But simply point out that I think we all have a shared concern about some of these issues to various extents. I think some of the easier ones to handle are George Clyde of the East Shore Planning Group mentioned his concerns about the provisions for regulating retail sales of ag products and processing of ag products. I heard him indicate that he was in agreement with the changes that had been made to that to address his concerns about making sure that folks who are operating those sales facilities are actively engaged in producing the product that's either sold or processed on other farms in the farm shed meeting Sonoma and Marin. And I dare say that I think we're in agreement with Coastal Commission staff on that as well. So my assumption now is that that we've taken care of that issue. John Sharp mentioned a few issues. The questions about the soft submittal. I think I know what that is, but it's a term that comes from the Coastal Commission staff, so I'll let them comment on that. He also mentioned an issue that I regrettably, I think I failed to mention during my initial comments, and that is his contention about our staff's earlier assertion that the Coastal Commission lacked the authority, or at least we were unclear about the authority of the Coastal Commission to weigh in on appeals regarding developments that are subject to exemptions determinations. We've done some additional research into that area, and I think we're in agreement now with staff's opinion that the commission does have the authority to weigh in on those types of decisions. Amy Traynor made one point in her very articulate comments about her concerns of overseeing in a kind of a systematic and more permit-oriented way changes in agricultural use, but also mentioned that that there may have been a lack of standards or performance standards, the insinuation being perhaps connected to the approach that I described earlier this morning. And I want to point out that we designed our alternative language, which is in the blue sheet, with performance standards that include, I think most importantly, what may be one of the AAC's biggest concerns, that new or renewed ag would not be allowed to operate if it were extending into a new area where an ESHA or an ESHA buffer were located. And I think we have some additional work to follow up on that with the Coastal Commission staff on how that type of a performance standard is reviewed and checked off. Finally, I want to mention the farmhouse provision and Jameson Watt's concerns. Our staff, Coastal Commission staff and our county staff put quite a bit of work on that, into that issue leading up to this meeting. And I think we have attempted to devise a solution that may respond to Malt's concerns. But Jameson's comments leave me with the belief that I think we want to make sure that that we have this opportunity to sit down with representatives of the agri community to explain the more recent work that we've done, also hone in on a couple of the other issues I mentioned, the ag issues earlier this morning, particularly the inclusion of partial ownership as defining the farm, just to make sure that we haven't missed anything in the final analysis and final recommendation for solutions that we will bring forward to you later. And then in closing, I just want to reiterate my request that we're very interested in receiving your feedback on the issues that have been raised, and particularly the agricultural issues, before the close of this hearing, so that we have the benefit of your direction on how to continue working on these issues as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll bring it back to our staff, beginning with Kevin or Diane?
So I think Kevin's going to go through a few things based on what we heard this morning, and then I have some thoughts, and Dr. Lester may have some additional thoughts.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, we'd like to offer a little bit of additional explanation on certain important IP issues and respond to some of the comments that were spoken previously. There's been a lot of discussion both today and with the county previously about agricultural dwelling units and the concept of one farmhouse per farm. Just for clarification, LUP policy Ag 5 allows only a single farmhouse or a combination of one farmhouse and up to 2 intergenerational homes per farm owner or operator, regardless of the number of legal lots he or she owns. The policy helps implement other LUP policies that require the maximum amount of land to be left in agricultural production, and that requires all development within the APZ zone to be necessary for agricultural production. Based on these policies, findings can never be made that a second farmhouse on the same farm for the same farmer is necessary for ag production and retains the maximum amount of land in ag production. This concept is inherent in the existing certified LCP, which also requires all development to be necessary, and states that allowing each parcel to build up to the zoning density would inappropriately reduce productive ag land and inefficiently strain public services in rural areas. As such, the approved LUP and the IP as modified serves as a proactive mechanism to avoid the potential for a farmer to own multiple farmhouses spread across multiple legal lots. Furthermore, the policy serves as a clustering tool. Instead of multiple farmhouses spread across those lots, up to 3 dwelling units clustered together on one parcel are allowed. County staff and some members of the public have expressed concerns about this concept, claiming that the policies will encourage farmers to sell their lots and break up their farms and risk their agricultural enterprise. However, staff does not believe this will occur. First, as discussed in both page 1 of the addendum and page 31 of the staff report, because the IP requires 60-acre densities in order to build a farmhouse, including requiring a lot to be 120 acres in order to build a farmhouse and an intergenerational home, a farmer has an incentive to retain large lot size. Second, because the IP requires deed restrictions as a condition of farmhouse and intergenerational home approval, requiring the owner to be continuously, actively, and directly engaged in agricultural use, and ensuring that the lot remains confined to agriculture, as well as suggested modifications that prohibit allowing single-family residences up to the zoning density as an allowed use. Land values are driven agriculturally as opposed to residentially. Therefore, the threat of converting ag lands to places suitable for large residential estates owned and occupied by residents who have no intention of actively farming is reduced. And finally, Marin County farmers have an economic incentive to retain large land holdings. Ag production is their livelihood, and it does not appear likely that a farmer would voluntarily sell his or her land and put their livelihood at risk. With respect to the required deed restriction, public comments have stated that it's unclear whether the deed restriction for the farmhouse or intergenerational home approval applies to just the lot that upon which the dwelling is located or the entire farm. County staff has also requested that language be added to clarify that the deed restriction is only recorded against the one legal lot. It was not staff's intention to restrict the other legal lots, but to make this point even clearer, staff recommended an additional modification, and this is described on page 8 of the addendum to make even clearer that the restriction only applies to the singular lot and not the farm. Let's see, moving on to the permitting of agricultural development. Obviously, a lot of public comment on this issue. So with respect to this, several commenters have questioned why a coastal permit is required at all for ag uses on agriculturally zoned property. I mean, it's first important to note that staff is not instituting new coastal permit requirements for agriculture. The definition of development, including what does and does not require a coastal permit, is specified in the Coastal Act and its regulations. Staff's IP modifications try to make clearer how those requirements pertain to agriculture, which is specifically identified in the land use plan as a county priority to clarify for the ag community those agricultural uses for which no permit is required. To accomplish this task and implement this LUP policy, staff has articulated in the IP that ongoing legally established agricultural uses do not require a coastal permit. What requires a coastal permit is development that constitutes either a change in use or intensity of use or new grading into an area that has not previously been farmed. The Commission's suggested modifications expressly acknowledge that existing, legally established, ongoing production activities that have been part of a regular pattern of agricultural practices, including ongoing rotational grazing and crop farming, that has not been discontinued in the previous 10 years, does not constitute development requiring a CDP. The Commission's definition of ongoing agricultural activities uses a 10-year threshold. As is discussed in page 40 of the staff report, and this 10-year limit emanates from recent Commission actions, including approving a 5-year time limit in San Luis Obispo County, based on the particular circumstances in that county. In Marin, after discussion with the county and stakeholder groups, while disagreement remained for some, 10 years was generally deemed appropriate since farmers would not let their fields lay fallow longer than this time period. In addition, though, even if an agricultural activity has been discontinued for longer than the previous 10 years, the activity may still be found ongoing if the applicant shows his or her ongoing intention to reinstate the production activity. Therefore, as recommended, ongoing agricultural activities is defined to include existing legally established production activities, including all ongoing grading and routine agricultural cultivation practices such as plowing, tilling, planting, harvesting, and seeding, which have not been expanded into never-before used areas and have not been discontinued for more than the previous 10 years. Conversion of grazing to crop production or any other new activity that involves grading is not an ongoing agricultural production activity, but instead requires a coastal permit. However, as described in detail on page 41 of the staff report, the IP offers many tools to expedite that permitting process. Processing and sales facilities. Numerous public comments have addressed the origin of products used in agricultural processing facilities and retail sales facilities. LUP Policy Ag 2 was modified by the Commission at the LUP hearing to designate processing and sales facilities that use products grown within the farm shed to be principally permitted. The intent was to give the ag community more flexibility in the processing and sales of their products, which would help sustain the agricultural economy. In talks with the ag community, they suggested defining the farm shed as Marin and Sonoma counties, which became the basis for staff's recommendation. In response to public comments against allowing for products to be grown on farms not owned by the person proposing to process the product, staff made an additional modification, which was language suggested by the county, to ensure that all products come from farms in Marin and Sonoma where the applicant is actively engaged in agricultural use on those lands. This modification is found on page 8 of the addendum, and staff believes that this will ensure that the products being processed and sold will appropriately ensure that agriculture is enhanced. Finally, with respect to hazards, the county has expressed concern with both the LUP as certified by the Commission and the modified IP's environmental hazards policies and standards. County staff believes that the policies are complex and will take time to fully understand. The Commission absolutely agrees and recognizes that LCP policies addressing hazards is a continuously evolving endeavor based on new scientific evidence. The Commission issued grant monies to the county for this particular purpose to study the threats facing Marin's coastline and develop appropriate policy responses in a public setting through a robust public process to address and proactively abate those threats. The Commission expects that the county will submit a thorough and robust LCP amendment submittal at the conclusion of this process that will address any remaining issues with the LCP updates hazards policies. In the interim, though, the Commission certified LUP and the IP as suggested to be modified offers a detailed and encompassing hazards response framework that is largely based on the Commission's draft sea level rise policy guidance and is consistent with recent LCP amendments approved by the Commission on these complicated land use, planning, and permitting issues. I'll hand it over back to Dan.
I think first, Chief Counsel Peterson is going to provide a couple of comments before I close.
Yes, thank you, Dan. I would just like to respond briefly to the comments made by one member of the public regarding the authority of the Commission or the county to include provisions regarding takings approvals in the LCP. As commissioners aware, the Commission has a long-standing practice of, in situations where a potential denial raises takings concerns, of evaluating whether or not the Commission should approve a project in order to avoid a taking. The courts have I guess I would disagree with the characterization that the member of the public has provided regarding court decisions. It's absolutely true that courts have the final word about whether a particular action would constitute a taking, and the courts have the ability to accept evidence during the judicial proceedings about whether or not an action would be a taking. I'm not aware of any court decisions, however, that would limit the Commission's authority or a local government's authority when implementing a local coastal program to consider whether a particular action would constitute a taking and avoid taking an action that would. They cite a Sierra Club case asserting that that case establishes that LCPs may not include provisions regarding takings that would allow exceptions to LCP policies. I believe that's an incorrect interpretation of that case. In that particular case, the Commission had decided not to designate certain areas as ESHA, and the Court of Appeal had ruled that the mere potential of takings concerns that might arise if an area is designated as ESHA is not a reason to decide not to designate it as ESHA. If it qualifies as ESHA, it should still be designated as ESHA. But the court expressly acknowledged that at the permit stage, the decision maker could then evaluate on a case-by-case basis whether the presence of the ESHA and the development restrictions would constitute a taking. So it did not preclude the commissioner or local government from including takings provisions in an LCP. Thank you.
And then quickly, just a couple of things to add on to what Kevin said. One thing, with respect to the farm as a unit of measurement, I mean, that's something that we've worked very hard on with the county. This has raised a lot of concerns with many of the commenters that you heard today. We did reach a tentative agreement on a way forward. We think that much of the objectives of the LUP and the IP as modified are directed towards protecting family farms. That's why this commission approved the intergenerational provisions last year, and that's why we tried in the IP to figure out a way to implement that. And I think there was some misunderstandings about that. The intent is when a farmer is to come in and apply for a farmhouse, an agricultural dwelling unit, and or an intergenerational home, they identify the farm. And so it's for the purposes of that farm, they have a farmhouse, they have up to 2 intergenerational homes. That's when you identify all the properties. The restriction that Kevin was referring to only applies to the one legal lot on which any of those dwellings are sited. There isn't any provision for a forced merger. I heard a number of comments about lots being required to be merged. There aren't any requirements like that, including the language that we agreed with the county that's on, it's in the addendum, page 8, which specifies that those lots aren't going to be restricted. So if you have 5 large legal lots that make up your farm, you put the house and the intergenerational homes on one of those large lots, 180 acres. The other 4 aren't restricted. Should the farmer decide to sell those properties or sell or acquire an easement or anything like that, that's all still allowed. There's no restriction on those properties. So just want to be clear, and there's no merger requirement. So we think that we've come up with a solution. Obviously, if we engage if this gets moved to a future, we continue to engage on this, we'll look at all the ramifications. We think we've come up with a solution on that, though. The second thing is with respect to ongoing agriculture. This was a subject of a lot of comments. And maybe to break it down to the nubs of it from our perspective, we've structured an ongoing agricultural definition that we believe allows people to do what they're doing currently without permits. So if you're farming, you're doing row crop agriculture, you're maintaining your grazing lands, you're doing water quality BMPs, whatever you're doing now, you can continue to do without getting a permit. That's the intent of it. And so it's looking back 10 years, and as Kevin mentioned, there had been a lot of discussion about what's the appropriate time frame there. A couple years back when we did San Luis Obispo County, we arrived at a 5-year time period, for example. But again, the intent is if you're doing it now, you can continue to do it. And then the 10 year is a presumption. The way that the language is structured, it actually allows you to go even further back to demonstrate that you had the intent to continue to operate an ag operation, and that too could be exempt under that definition. It's built in that allows the county to make a determination if something had been going on prior to the 10 years. I think then the next part, this is consistent with the commission's approach, including as articulated in the ag workshop that most of you sat through. But one thing I think is really important that I'm not sure it's fully, maybe there's some misunderstandings. This county has a categorical exclusion that applies to agricultural activities. So to the extent you're not already exempt by virtue of the ongoing agricultural definition, the Cat X is very broad, and you'd be excluded from permit requirements because of that. To the extent, for whatever reason, you didn't meet those tests, we've now included some processing options, including the minor process, which is without a hearing, and the de minimis process, which is akin to the de minimis waiver process that we do here, to help streamline any activity or any development that might otherwise require a permit. And I think the county could also have a streamlined process even for those activities that required a permit. I think the next step, though, is thinking about, there's all sorts of possibilities for this county and other counties to pursue, for example, one of the speakers spoke about the beneficial project, the grazing operation and protecting the stream. We have multiple counties where we've done federal consistency review to allow for beneficial projects to be processed on a streamlined basis. I think there's 6 or 7 such operations or programs going on statewide, and a couple permit processes just like that, where they're pre-permitted essentially. Santa Cruz County is a good example. And so that's something that could be part of something moving forward. The other part, when San Luis Obispo County came in with their ag ordinances, to which I referred the 5-year process, they built in a whole series of beneficial project, streamline, check off, make it easy for farmers to do those kinds of projects. I think finally, our suggestion with respect to this issue is, to the extent things aren't covered by all the things that I just described, I think we are open, and we've expressed this to the county in other interests, to looking at this categorical exclusion and trying to identify those things, some of the thresholds, some of the performance standards, and modifying this exclusion so that these things can be covered to the extent they're not covered now. And so we think that we've provided a whole streamlining approach, but at the same time we think there's more that we could do through the categorical exclusion process. And we're open to that. I think lastly, I just wanted to speak a little bit to, and I think you got it from the speakers, this is really complicated. There's a lot of stuff going on here. And the 700 odd pages of staff report, I do want to note that roughly 300 of that is the IP as modified, and another 150 or so is the land use plan that you approved. But yes, there's a lot of detail here, and it's difficult in a setting like this when there's so much detail being brought up, obviously, for you to deliberate on that. And we can understand to the extent that there's a need to go back and work with the county on these things. We understand that completely. We're looking for some direction, I think, from you as a body on that, but really to the extent possible, the specific issues, and if there are particular directions, we're really interested in hearing that. So if this is continued, obviously there's still going to be more detail. We'll work hard with all the stakeholders to bring it home. We had hoped to do that today. I just would note that your staff has put in an incredible amount of time to get us to this point. I mean, we were hoping to get over the hump, still are, but we've worked very hard to get to this point and finish. And to some of the commenters about the process, we've been as open and transparent and inclusive as we possibly can. We had a set of mods out a year ago to the county. We had a set of mods out to everybody about 6 months ago that are largely the mods that you see today. And we've taken comments from everybody, and it's really, I think, made a much better product. We've listened and been able to come up with something that I think addresses many of the people's issues, maybe not all, but I just wanted to note that has been our process, and that has always been our intent. So with that, I don't know if you... So with that, it's all yours.
Thank you. That and a hungry commission. Yeah. Thanks so much. I'm going to just begin, and then I've got Commissioner Schallenberger, and I'm sure there will be others that want to speak as well. But I think that I'll think about that. Okay. I'm asked to think about the hungry part. But I also see a large crowd that have been very patient, and I wanted to just acknowledge from the beginning that there's no question. I've told Dr. Lester I feel like I'm wearing 2 jerseys at the same time, right? I have Marin County as the policy board that I serve on as an elected official, and I have the privilege of serving as a coastal commissioner, and even more so in this opportunity to chair the commission. And I recognize that, and the law provides for that and understands that, and at the same time I've strived to be fair and open and consider the comments that I heard today through the filter of being a California coastal commissioner, and I will continue to do that. I think that before I turn to Commissioner Schallenberger, I just want to make a few comments more broadly. One is that I do agree that both the Marin County staff and the Coastal Commission staff have worked tirelessly to get to this point here, and I appreciate the hard efforts of each of them. They couldn't have been as effective as they have been, and they have been effective, if it hadn't been for the deep and passionate commitment of the larger community. And it's the entire larger community that I think I want to thank. I'm not picking out a particular segment of this community. What we have in West Marin in our coastal zone is absolutely the pristine and inspirational result of partnerships between environmental advocates, small town advocates, small public utilities, nonprofits, and certainly our historic ag community. So each of them has played an important role and has really led to the fabric of achievement that we have. And so I appreciate all of that, as well as the staff. At the same time, I do want to single out and praise our agriculture here, partly because it is remarkable. It isn't something that's happened by accident. It's taken 45 years of hard and disciplined work, multidisciplinary work, to get to the ability to protect 150 years of a way of living. And it's really humbling and inspirational for me to hear and see the turnout today, because ag is defined as a high priority coastal resource. And I think it's important, and I've said it to this commission on many occasions, not specific to my own county, that we need to understand agriculture better, and we need to recognize that agriculture is different in larger ag-producing counties than in smaller ones, and we need to tailor our ag policies accordingly. I do think that it's really important for us as a commission to help provide policy, and so the key point I wanted to make today is it's very helpful to hear your individual thoughts. Dan suggested to be as specific as you can, and if you can, that's great. But that's an important point. And then lastly, I would just say that the structure that we work under the Coastal Act, and these various plan procedures for a land use plan and an implementation plan that create a local coastal program amendment, all have very clear and specific purposes, and they all have associated timelines with them. So while I understand and certainly support the request for a continuance, I think it's in the best interest of everyone, this commission, the public that wants to understand what others have said, the county and the coastal staff. I understand that. I would say that we will depend upon our staff, or should depend upon our staff, to give us some guidance on exactly how we should proceed to achieve this. But whatever procedure goes forward, whether it's a continuance or anything else, whatever way we go forward from here, it is by no means a failure. It is the buildup of accomplishment that's given us this and gives us a chance to finish this in a way where this commission doesn't have to deal with so many questions, or at least lack of certainty. So with that, I appreciate the commission's indulgence, and I'm going to turn to Commissioner Schallenberger.
Thank you, Chair Kinsey. I move the Commission continue Implementation Plan Amendment LCP-2-MAR-13-0224-1, Part B, for Marin County, and ask for a yes vote.
Second.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
I would, thank you. First of all, I just want to thank everybody in the room. It's rare to have something that is this complicated, and it is complicated, and an IP is expected to be complicated and very, very detailed. And the level of feeling of good faith here from all sides was terrific, as we heard from the public, and as well as the county and our staff. So if we grant this continuance, to give, or whatever mechanism to give the staff more time to work with the county, I'm really confident that you will be able to work out hopefully all of these, and my guess most of the issues that are still outstanding. It's So it's with, sometimes we do continuances because we think, oh my gosh, we're never going to get there. This isn't that at all. And I do agree with Chair Kinsey that the best way is to have everybody in the room, all the interests, working together to sort out some of these. Having said that, there are some outstanding issues, and I'm not going to get into the detail. I'm going to try and say where I'm coming from on the broader policies. And just as background, when I speak of ag, I grew up on one of our family farms. I come from, many of my family are still dairymen. I grew up on a dairy farm. For the last 20 years, I've run a cow-calf operation on the property that we have, our ranch in the Central Valley. It's not on the coast. So I feel these ag issues as many as you all do in my heart. It's not just an academic thing for me. Having said that, I'm also well aware that all ag is not the same. And we use the word as if dairy cows and growing alfalfa and growing tomatoes and viticulture was all the same industry. And it's really not. It's all grouped as ag, and the Coastal Commission, the Coastal Act doesn't differentiate, but I have it firsthand living in the Central Valley. When we started our cow-calf operation, it was all grazing. It was all beef. It's beef and cowboys. That's what we had, It's too bad we're losing the cowboys. But during the last 20 years, basically the economy drives ag. And whether again, I'm going to talk Central Valley, it's a great, huge bloom of almonds. Almond trees in the Central Valley take up 10% of the water used for ag in this whole state. And 70% of the almonds are exported out of this country. So I have witnessed firsthand our beef business and industry all around me turned into grapes. In order to plant a vineyard, you need to hire a D10 cat. And then there's a tooth on the back, which is 12 by 12 inches, and it's 10 feet long. And it goes down into the ground and slowly rips the soil, rips it up, because that's what you have to do to grow, to put in grapes. Obviously, you don't need to do that to put in onions or tomatoes. You can have a dairy farm and use some of your land for alfalfa, and then decide to put it back to grasslands, or put in some row crops, but once you've put in grapes, you have destroyed the soil. It will never, ever, there is no more flexibility to go back to some of these other things. So I'm not picking on viticulture because nobody likes their wine better than I do, and there's going to be a chuckle up here because that's well known. But my point here is that all ag isn't equal. And so those people who are testifying that ag should be completely exempt, I would say no. And I think that that's not in the best interest of, it's not really what Marin County wants. But on the other hand, do I think that all ag should get permits? No. I think that what we need here is to continue to work toward a very nuanced way at the local government in terms of permitting, much of what Dan Carl talked about. Some things may be exempt, some things may be expedited, but some things really should have a very careful look, and the public should be invited in for the decision of whether or not some of these changes would make. I'm not going to put a proposal out there. This is why you all are going to go back and talk about it. But this whole question of ag and permitting or not permitting needs to be carefully nuanced and not a broad brush toward any of it. So the other thing that it was, one thing was brought up about a 5 or 10 acre somehow exemption from anything if going into new agriculture. I would be against anything like that as a broad brush exemption again, because that's how you change land use, 5 acres at a time. That's how I end up living in the middle of wine growing country instead of beef cattle. It happened 5, 10 acres at a time. So again, any broad brush total exemption or total requirement for a permit, I am not going to look kindly on. But that isn't what I'm hearing from either the county or the staff. I do, as a general principle, and specifically here, I think it's very important that the public be included, not just in this IP, but in land use decisions that are made going forward once the IP is adopted. So, and it doesn't necessarily, when I say the public involved, again, I think there are many layers. It doesn't mean that you have to have a public hearing for every action taken. It may be public notice, it may be, but the public, we've spent a lot of time talking about agriculture and the need to support agriculture, which I wholeheartedly do. But it's an industry that is functioning in a county whose citizens also should have a say in how the county is developed and changed or not. The item about restoration and that we would be discouraging that, I actually have done a restoration, not me personally. Well, it was me and all of the landowners on the watershed of Murphy Creek, which is a wonderful creek, and really smart salmon hang a left when they get to Murphy Creek after they're coming up the McCollummy, because if they go straight, they're going into the fish hatchery. So everybody in our watershed, there were about 7 ranchers on this creek, and we got together and did a major restoration. And we had to get permits for it. And I have to say that many of those permits actually improved the restoration. There were state and federal agencies, local agencies that actually knew much more technically about how to restore a salmon spawning creek. So again, I think that it's not an all or nothing. It's not you all need permits or total exemption. That would be my comments. Again, they're general, and it's encouragement for folks to find a legitimate middle ground as opposed to an all or nothing. And remembering, we've talked most about ag, but the other really precious thing about your county, this gorgeous county, is the natural resources. So buffers of ESHA and things like that are every bit as important as supporting your industry. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bochco, to your second, and are other commissioners interested?
Only briefly, I quite agree with Commissioner Schallenberger. I think all of those are very good considerations that you should keep in mind when you're finalizing. I'm only going to bring up one thing that it disturbed me before when we were talking about the LUP, and it still disturbs me. And I think the best language I could say would be to look at Ms. Trainor's letter about view sheds. I still feel that we're too exposed. Bundling is one thing, view shed protection is another. And you can bundle on a ridge, you can bundle, right in front of a scenic highway. So I just want to make sure when you're going through this that you have the same view shed protections that we have in a lot of other counties. And I know in this county, a lot of people are very sensitive to it and they just do it anyway. I mean, they are very careful to place the structures where they can't be seen or in other ways disturb the natural beauty. And I also want to commend you for deciding on that no merger thing. I think that was a little overreaching when we were all talking about it. And as long as they have a certain number of acreage, they get a certain number of structures. I think that was good. I'm still a little concerned about primary use and having no appeals in certain situations, but I trust you guys have been working on this so long that you probably are best to judge. And the last just cautionary I would say is water usage is such a big deal. And will always be now that we realize that droughts are going to be at least on and off years at a time. That whatever, exemptions we give, whatever waivers we give, that water is always something that we can keep the right to look at, usage and quality. So that's my only comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner McClure, then Commissioner Groom, then Commissioner Turnbull Sanders.
Thank you.
there's been a tremendous amount of work done here, and there's still some issues that are kind of hanging out there for me. And one is I don't really understand the density argument, and that how, if I am fortunate enough to own 2 or 3 or 4 60-acre parcels in a community, that say I can have a farmhouse, and because of my good fortune, I'm now only going to be able to have 1 farmhouse unless I pull the 2 properties together. When I read it here and it says that if the farmer had 2 legal lots, 60 acres, he would have to voluntarily merge the 2 parcels. So I do see that those parcels are getting merged. And then you have the 3rd parcel hanging out there if you want the 2nd intergenerational house to be put on the first 60 acres. And then what happens to that 60 acres? Could those 60 acres then be sold to someone? And then they could build a farmhouse then? And so now you've had a density increase on one 60-acre parcel. Another 60-acre parcel has been set aside, not allowing any kind of dwelling. And the 3rd one was added, but it doesn't appear to merge. But I guess my basic premise is, if I have 6 children and I want to give my 6 lots to each child, and they're part of my family farm, I can't allow them to live on the farm of 60 acres. So I still have a really hard time with the idea that because a lot of these families here, because my family has been farming in the region since 1850 and have been fortunate enough to acquire land and now bringing their children back, this doesn't work for me, because I'm still convinced that when we start out that the IP requires a 60-acre density in order to build a farmhouse. That's what it requires. But now if you want a 2nd farmhouse and you own 2 parcels, you don't get to do it that way. Now you have to merge them. And so for me, I'm extremely uneasy. And so I don't know if you can clarify any of that or tell me if I'm right on the dime.
I can attempt to clarify some of it. I think that the question about additional dwelling units for members of the family, I mean, specifically in this case, the intergenerational homes, and the idea that there would be a farmhouse and up to 2 intergenerational homes, that's something that came out of the county's long and inclusive process to identify what would be appropriate for the family farm. And their proposal was that that would be per 60 acres, the farmhouse, and then if the first intergenerational home would require another 60 acres and the second another 60 acres. That's all the county's proposal. I mean, we've implemented it in the way that you saw in our mods, but that's not something we've introduced through our mods. That's what came out of the county's process. And so it's just stating that that density is, to allow those up to 3 agricultural dwelling units, you would need 180 acres. And again, that came out of the county's process.
And then what happens if I sell the 3rd parcel?
Well, and that's if those...
Because the 3rd parcel doesn't seem to be tied to the deed. It doesn't appear to be merged.
I'm not sure which is the 3rd parcel. If you said you had 3 60-acre parcels, if you ultimately wanted to have a farmhouse and 2 intergenerational homes, you need a 180-acre parcel to be able to do that.
And all 3 of them then would be merged to 1?
If in that density scenario, yeah, that would because you need 180 acres.
Okay.
Yeah.
That wasn't clear. So that's my biggest, I still have that because I just kind of feel that as a property owner, and the county confirms that this is their proposal and that the farm community is happy with the idea of being able to take all of their, I'm seriously asking that question, because if that's what I'm being told, that it was brought forward by the community after all these public meetings, so I would like to ask the county that here we have a density issue, that currently you have a 60-acre parcel, that now because I own more than one, I have to do it in these density blocks. That's your proposal that you're bringing forward?
This issue has been around the county for quite some time, and one of the concerns that we've heard dating back probably 10 or 15 years from now is that the county has very restrictive standards in our countywide plan, our general plan and zoning ordinance about subdividing agricultural properties. We have to make findings that the subdivision somehow not only continues agriculture, but enhances it. And those are very, very difficult tests to meet. We've also been hearing from ag producers that they would like to have the option of building a home or two. I've never heard large numbers involved in this request, but a home or two for a family member who may not be involved in the day-to-day agricultural operations of the land. For example, an elderly parent who had been working the land but just no longer can, or a son or a daughter who spends most of their time working in another job over the hill in Petaluma. And so that was the genesis for the county's proposal to allow up to 2 intergenerational homes on a legal lot of record, as long as that there was the density involved within that legal lot to accommodate those intergenerational homes.
Okay, but now if I own 6 legal lots.
Yes.
And it's on the west side, and I have, each one of those is a 60-acre lot. I'm not allowed to build a farmhouse on each one of those. Is that correct?
That's not our understanding, no. Our understanding is that the restriction on 1 farmhouse and 2 intergenerational homes would be confined to 1 legal lot, as long as that lot had the acreage to accommodate it. But the additional legal lots of record that may constitute the farm that are within a contiguous holding could be sold off, and that they would not be encumbered with any type of restricted covenant that would impair their ability to be developed, or at least proposed to be developed, as separate farms in the future.
This is only contiguous?
Well, as I mentioned in my comments, one of
that's
the
what
concerns
you
we
want.
have is that the definition of farm under the proposed IP could include non-contiguous parcels that are under common ownership.
Correct.
And you may recall that that's one of our concerns, and how
that's-
that could result in some practical problems for farmers filing applications for farm homes, or inhibit the ability of a farmer or rancher who has a large land holding in one part of the county from even proposing a farmhouse on that ranch if they own a very small partial ownership in a ranch somewhere else in the county where their brother or sister already has a farmhouse. That's because that could be construed as meaning that's your one farmhouse, even though it's 20 miles away, and you have a partial ownership in this overall family operation, and the family operation is, say, grazing cattle. So we wouldn't be able to make the finding that this is some separate and independent ag operation. So, I think the bottom line here is that we need to revisit it, make sure that everybody has a common understanding of what it means, and it is complicated, so it's understandable that you're asking those questions and you're getting your comments, and also to make sure that we haven't missed any type of unintended consequence or concern before we come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just say on the contiguous parcel question, I think we've solved this in our mods, including identifying, to the extent there are non-contiguous parcels that could be on the other side of the county, that could be a separate farm. I mean, we're still talking about, again, the farm as our unit of measurement, but to the extent you own another property that's its own separate farming operation, then it's its own separate farm.
Okay.
We've
because
we've
you
structured it that way.
Theoretically, you could be doing a dairy and roque farm.
Sure, yeah, and that's what
And we wouldn't count those as the same farm.
Exactly. So
Okay.
our mods, I think, account for that.
That's good to hear. Thanks for your good work.
Commissioner Groom.
Thank you very much. I come from a county that has a lot of agriculture, and so this has been a very interesting discussion because I hear it quite frequently in my own board chambers. But there was 3 things that kind of concerned me because while Kevin explained them very clearly, I thought the public testimony there was an unclarity about them, and those were streamlining permits, crop selection, and public hearing, and involvement with the public in our hearing. So those are the 3 things I'd like us to look at very carefully.
Thank you. Commissioner Trimble Sanders?
I concur with my fellow commissioners in that I believe that we
need to really focus on striking that proper balance between protecting the environment and making sure that our priority of use with respect to agriculture and the coast is respected. I wanted to thank the staff and the public and the county for all their hard work on this report. And I know one of the things that particularly rang true with me was the number of comments that we heard from local farmers who were concerned about this issue of ongoing agricultural issues, which is on page 40 of the staff report, and whether or not that 10-year requirement whether or not there would be exemptions from that 10-year requirement. And my concern is just whether or not local farmers will be able to have the flexibility to take into account environmental changes, market changes that may require very quick responses and changes in their crops. And Mr. Carl, you mentioned that San Luis Obispo County was they developed a checklist that had categorical exemptions. Is that something that could be worked on with the county in this case to make it easier for the farmers? Because I can't imagine waiting a year before getting the right to change crops in some cases.
Well, a couple of things going on there. With San Luis Obispo County, it was more a process that they identified for some of the things that would constitute agricultural grading, for example. And they worked with the RCD and the NRCS to come up with these checklists that would be implemented through the LCP and through the coastal permit process. But it was a streamlining tool. To the extent that Marin County wanted to look into that, I think that was a great, in our view, great approach. That was something the county's actually gone back and they're reconsidering that and some other things. One of the things in terms of the streamlining that I was suggesting was the current CADX covers many things that if you weren't already considered ongoing ag, the current CADX is very broad, covers all sorts of agricultural production activities. To the extent there was an interest, and I think there is, on behalf of the county to talk about some things that might constitute development, in our view, under the Coastal Act, but that could be made part of that CADX, including, like I was saying before, some of the performance standards and things like that. We're really interested in having that conversation because we think that that's a viable way for this county and some other counties to address some of these issues and to provide the flexibility that you're looking for the farmers at the same time as respecting, like Commissioner Schallenberger was referring to, the Coastal Act and the need to look at some of these things a little closer.
I just wanted to clarify, categorical exclusion, or CADX, is a separate submittal to the Commission that the Commission can then approve, which would exclude from permitting requirements certain categories of development that you find don't raise any potential significant impacts. So it's a Coastal Act mechanism to make more things exempt from permitting.
I guess my concern is that, sometimes we get so bogged down in the details, and I'm supportive of a continuance so that we can sort through this a little bit more carefully, but I think we just need to be mindful, and I think staff has acknowledged this, just be mindful of how this impacts people day to day, and that, many of the applicants may not have attorneys or may not have the expertise to apply for appropriate permits. So I think the easier we can make it, that's one of my fundamental concerns. The other was related to desal, and I think there's an issue on page 128 about the exemption. I'm assuming that that's just a matter of an economy of scale issue and looking at a prohibition on desal just because it may not make sense to have small desal projects in this area.
Kevin may have some more detail on this. My understanding is that the submittal from the county was attempting to say that you couldn't do desal, and the modifications that we provided were that unless it's consistent with the Coastal Act. I mean, there are some Coastal Act provisions about this type of development, and so we found that to be the appropriate common ground. I'm not sure if that's the reference to which you referred on. I'm not sure which page you were looking at.
Maybe it's 126 or 128. It's item number 18. And it states, due to the coastal zone's unique natural resources and recreational opportunities, desalinization facilities shall be prohibited,
Right.
consistent within the limitations of Public Resources Code. So you're saying that,
We were adding back in the flexibility that you can't actually outright prohibit it under
Okay.
those sections.
so that desalinization plants will be cited pursuant to the Public Resources Code. So there won't be an outright prohibition on it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others? Yes, Commissioner Diaz?
Just briefly, I'm not familiar with the entire Coastal Commission staff. You guys are the ones I see when I occasionally get to visit. But this same issue was before us the last time I got to attend a commission meeting. So believe it or not, some of you look familiar to me. But farming was a topic of discussion the last time. It still is, although slightly different form. And I wonder if among the commission staff there are any agricultural experts or advocates employed. It seems to me you probably all have environmental law and environmental types of backgrounds. Do we have any ag people on staff?
We rely on Commissioner Schallenberger for that.
Maybe after the wine or before the wine?
Both.
So here after. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to touch on a sore subject. Clearly, you're all skilled at what you do, and I'm always impressed, and I do my best to read every word that you write, even when my reports come with a bolt. That was my first bolt in a report, and I read a lot of reports. But I would like to suggest that there's a very clear message from speakers today that the 10-year land use rule doesn't work for them. And it made perfect sense as they were going through it. And I think we might have avoided that entire subject if somebody on staff knew that it's quite practical to switch crops when it's time, either because you want to try a different crop or you're trying a different farming technique. So I would be less inclined to support a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year restriction. But I agree with Commissioner Schallenberger that not all crops are equal. So perhaps listing which crops are okay, there's got to be a long list. I don't know if you can make it exhaustive, but getting some sense of what you're trying to prevent, which is damaging the soil or creating some additional impact. Maybe green beans and onions there's not really a difference between the impact on the land for those crops, but certainly viticulture would be an area that you would want to have additional review of. So maybe by crop or subject matter would be a more appropriate way to try and achieve what you're trying to achieve. So there is a little bit of a conflict between the environmentalist in me and the ag supporter in me. My family, both my parents grew up on dairy farms. I grew up in the Salinas Valley. I live in an area that is in Southern California where avocados and citrus are struggling to stay alive as crops. And so that sensitivity between, wanting to make a process simple enough to make it business friendly and practical, and wanting to protect the environment, there's a little bit of a conflict there. So one of the speakers defined conservation through somebody else's quote, and I wish I had written it down, but luckily I can go back and watch. It was the malt guy. The malt guy. Something about the land working for both the people on it and the future of the land. So finding that balance. And I really want us to revisit that 10-year rule, and I preferably would want to throw out the time, the years attached, and make it more about the crop, if in fact you feel like you want to restrict that. I think I will forever be confused about the development rights and the farmhouse and the multi-generational housing and how you will implement that or restrict additional development. But luckily, we know this is from your own community. So among your community, you have to resolve that, and we will take your lead, I think, on that issue. But I would encourage, just to sum up, that as we place restrictions on different types of industries, that we really try to consider to rounding out our own staff to include that industry's expertise. And I think ag would be an easy one to come by. And you have this issue presumably up and down the state. Every county has some version, every place along the coast has some version of agriculture that maybe is underrepresented among your skill sets on staff. So bringing in an expert and having somebody there while you're writing all these reports that says, that 10-year thing's not going to work. That could have been an email or an office meeting instead of a commission hearing. So I would encourage us to add that to our list of talents. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. If there are no other commissioners, then I'm just going to make very quick comments. One is that I think that really the magnificence of this day is that we have so much that has already been agreed upon that we focused on a very limited number of things that still need to be resolved, and they're primarily around agricultural law. I think that the environmental hazard issue is a fundamental issue that has to be revisited as well. How that's going to be done is up to some conversations between our staff and the county staff. I think that the simplicity and the efficiency for the farmers is where we need to get to while still protecting the resources that we're charged to protect. And too many rules and regulations lead to outlaw behavior, which leads to expensive and ineffective enforcement. So getting it right and getting it simple is really the key for all of us, including our coastal staff. I think that the idea of a farm going off the farm and checking out partial interests and ownerships in other places or other parcels remotely is not necessary to have to develop all that information to be able to evaluate whether to let someone have a farmhouse or an intergenerational. So I'm hoping that at some point when this really gets resolved, we either get it right or get this commission to think about that with us. And that I think that the other thing is that there is, because of the complexity and because of the substantial points of view, that we're going to find that, just like desalination itself, that we're filtering this a few times, and that what we're going to find is a lot of stuff is actually right. We just have to get us all to understand that it's right. And so a little more time, a little clarity, a little bit of sessions between different interest groups and the coastal staff if necessary, I think is going to produce a document when it comes back to us that does have broader, wider understanding, which will lead to less issues and I think a very good outcome. And so with that, I think there's a procedural question that I'm going to ask Commissioner Schallenberg if she wants us to raise.
Yes, as you noticed when I made my motion, I did not include the time that it would come back. And so I'd like to ask staff, what are the time constraints on us or on the county to get this done?
Yeah, and that's something that's key here. We did hear a lot of really good public testimony and obviously a lot of great input from the commission, and all of this to the extent that we do want to work with the county to get it right. This is important. This is a 30-year plan. This is going to, we need to do that and spend that time. So we're okay with moving it forward like that. In terms of the procedural kind of issues, though, I know the county has indicated a preference for trying to work that out and bring it back in November, which is our hearing in Half Moon Bay, which is relatively close to Marin. Under our process, this IP, the deadline for the commission to act is in late July. It's already been extended. That's as far out as it can be extended. So there's no way for the commission to continue it past that date. Commission would have to act before then. And the second, many of the issues have to do with the LUP as it was approved. And I know the county, this has been an ongoing tension. And with respect to the hazards, that's one of the biggest components of it. That would need to be revisited. So at this juncture, what this is pointing to for us, if we're moving to trying to get it done, for example, for the November hearing, is the county would need to withdraw the implementation plan, go through this process, and resubmit. Mm-hmm. Basically, it would be a resubmittal of the LCP amendment, which we would consider at that point in time. Ideally, we've worked through everything that we all discussed, and we come forward with something that's much more agreement with the community and the county, and maybe we've narrowed it down to a few issues. But that's what would have to happen to get us out that far, to buy us that time, to actually do it in the way that I think you all are suggesting we do it.
Okay, could I ask the county to come forward? You heard what Dan Carl said. If we're really going to be able to work on this the way that you want to, the staff does, and the commission does, and you'd like to have it heard in November, which is not as far away as it sounds, what is your, would you be willing to withdraw and resubmit?
Yes, I would. And I understand that we're dealing with the limitations of the coastal commissions or the Coastal Act procedures that may not align with the way we'd prefer to work on that. But given the input from Dan Carl, I'm hereby withdrawing the IP, and by doing that, I want to make sure and very clear that that should not signify in any way a diminishment of our ability to continue working together. But we do believe that the November date is more realistic in terms of allowing the time that we think we need to work together, as well as with some of the stakeholders in the room, and give ourselves some time to prepare and review staff reports and for everybody to digest that material.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Could I call on Dr. Lester, because I will have a question unless he answers it, perhaps. Yeah.
I was just going to, thank the county for their cooperation in that, but highlight for you, as you've probably realized, the same staff that will be continuing to work on this is the staff that will be working with Sonoma County on the Iron Rangers. So we may have to go alternate weeks on which county we're paying attention to. But these are complicated efforts, and they take a lot of staff time, and this is exactly the kind of work that we've been able to do more of with the funding augmentation. But there's obviously enough demand and more demand for this kind of work, so I wanted to highlight that for you.
My question to the staff and then perhaps to the CDA director for Marin County is, why would one only withdraw the IP if in fact there is an LUP fatal flaw, at least in the opinion of the county? Wouldn't the appropriate thing to do to withdraw the entire LCP amendment, bring it and resubmit it as it's written, with the exception of that?
The commission has already acted on the LUP, so it's no longer in front of you. It's pending with the county.
But doesn't the county, so in other words, it will take an action on the part of the board to reject it, but if it did reject it, it could resubmit the LUP and its entire, the LCPA, the amendment that includes both in their entirety with a possible modification of that one issue?
That's probably likely. We can look at the procedural options. The county may have the option of accepting the LUP and then submitting a new IP, but...
Well, I want to just make sure that, that we don't let ourselves lose sight of where we want to be by the procedure, and I think that we'll count on all the bright legal minds and folks who understand the act to get it right. So if the action before us today is that you just withdrew the implementation plan, then this commission has no basis for taking an action on that today, and your long-awaited interest in lunch is upon you. And so, with that, I will say there's no vote required. It was an act of the county to withdraw its implementation plan. I want to thank everyone who's participated, and I can assure you that this withdrawal is not a retreat. It's a go-forward move. Thank you. The time for return will be in 1 hour. It's just... That's because